Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good evening, I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has admitted she should have laid the ground better for the government's mini-budget, which sparked days of financial market chaos. Speaking earlier on the BBC Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, Liz Truss said she's standing by her tax-cutting plans and refused to rule out public spending cuts. She says she's learned from her mistakes, but has insisted the tax cuts would boost economic growth. Ms Truss also said the decision was made by Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng and the Cabinet weren't told beforehand.
I do want to say to people that I understand their worries about what has happened this week, and I do stand by the package we announced, and I stand by the fact that we announced it quickly because we had to act. But I do accept we should have laid the ground better. I do accept that.
You accept you should have laid the ground better.
I have learnt from that. I have learnt from that, and I will make sure that in future we do a better job of laying the ground.
Meanwhile, former Cabinet Minister Michael Gove has criticised Liz Truss's package of tax cuts. He says the plans to pay for the cuts with increased borrowing were not Conservative.
I think that there is inherent risk, if you were a Conservative, in saying that you can borrow and borrow and borrow. This risk might pay off, but I am concerned by what it says about the core Conservative message of prudence. And the second concern that I have is that if we are to cut taxes, and I touched on it earlier, and there is a case, very good case, very respectable case, for relieving the burden on some, then it should not be people who are already wealthy.
Earlier, the Tory party conference opened with tributes to Her Majesty the Queen. Party members stood for a minute's silence in memory of the late Queen Elizabeth. The Cabinet remained standing to sing the national anthem in praise of King Charles III. Tomorrow, the Chancellor will make a speech at the conference and he'll say we must stay the course when it comes to his tax-cutting plans. A vigil has been held for the 125 people who were killed in Indonesia's stadium stampede. 323 people were also injured in the crush at a football match in the East Java province. Officers fired tear gas to try to control crowds after supporters of the losing home team invaded the pitch. As panic spread, thousands fled towards the stadium's exits, where many suffocated. An investigation has been launched. TV online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's over to Headliners.
I'm Mark Dolan, and this is Headliners, your first look at tomorrow's papers. Tonight in the company of the brilliant comedians Leo Kearse. Look at him, splendid in red velvet. I'd love to rub him. That's always my emotion.
You can, I'm right here.
Go on then. And the fabulous Diane Spencer. Always a clothes horse. There you go. Now, look, let's kick off with tomorrow's front pages. And we'll start with the Daily Mail. Fury as Gove stokes Tory 45p tax revolt. Truss allies accuse former minister of serious disloyalty and ask, isn't getting rid of one Prime Minister enough for him? Also, royal book sensation, why Harry snubbed William's secret offer to heal the rift. Next up, the Daily Telegraph. Truss delays vote on 45p tax cut after Tory revolt. Ditching levy shows wrong values, says Michael Gove, as MPs demand to know how it will be funded. Hospitals scrap more than 22,000 appointments every day is another story in the Telegraph. The Independent now. Gove calls on Truss to ditch tax cuts for the rich. Prime Minister admits mistakes in mini-budget but insists no change of plan. Guardian next. Tories threaten rebellion as Gove says tax plan is not conservative. And also, survey shows most young people fear for the future. The Mirror next. Calamity Conference. Truss is finished. Liz Truss will be ousted by Christmas unless she ditches her tax cuts for the wealthy, a senior Tory warned last night. The ex-cabinet minister said she's lost all credibility. She's a dead woman walking. She admitted on television earlier today that she should have laid the ground better for tax cuts, but blamed the policy on Kwasi Kwarteng. Party rules could be altered to axe the PM, say the Mirror. The Daily Express now. Kwasi, no more decline. We must stay the course. Watered-down alternatives to the mini-budget would leave Britain on the path to managed decline. This says the new Chancellor. Unstoppable, City thrash United, 6-3. And in the Metro, Gove, this isn't Tory. Cutting tax for wealthiest when people are suffering is display of wrong values. Former minister slams using borrowed money to fund the axing of the 45p rate. And the Star. No wonder we're loving it. Happy Meal. Beef burgers can help ward off depression and make us happy, psychiatrists have said. A major study found nutrients in the grub are ideal for boosting our mood. And those are your front pages. Kicking off with Monday's Mirror, and Michael Gove denies being a member of the Rebel Alliance, Diane.
Well, Michael Gove likes to do lots of strange impressions, doesn't he? So now I can't read anything he says in a paper without putting it into a strange voice. So the Mirror leads with Michael Gove attacks Liz Truss's tax cuts for the richest Brits as, quote, display of wrong values, end quote, which is, I imagine, how he said it. So Gove, I think, is one of the Tories that everybody recognises. And I feel like he is crossing his fingers that some kind of leadership contest is going to be held again, because he's kind of known for these sort of weird, shady moves. I mean, I agree with him. I don't think that cutting the tax, the 45p tax on the richest is a good plan at all. But I don't really trust Michael Gove because of the moves he's pulled in the past. Do you think that's fair?
Well, that's right. He wants to get back into government, doesn't he? And his dream would be for Liz Truss to fall and Rishi Sunak to be installed as the emergency Prime Minister to save the day.
Yeah, because then Michael Gove will be put back in the cabinet and have more power, which is what he wants. I mean, at the moment, he's got the power to disrupt the Tory party, and, you know, right when they need some stability, and, you know, maybe everybody could rally round the party and rally around the Prime Minister, maybe just for a week while she finds her feet. I don't know. Maybe that could be an idea. And also his idea that rich people, these tax cuts are just targeting rich people. That's a nonsense, because they're targeting anybody who earns money. Anybody who earns money is going to be better off, unless you're earning, like, you know, a few £1,000s a year. You know, they're cutting the tax from the lowest tax band to the highest tax band. And also, rich people in this country pay a crazy amount of tax, which disincentivises people to either live in this country or be rich. What's the point of earning more money if you're just going to have it taken off you? We pay more tax than Norway. in this country. Never mind, you know, America or, you know, somewhere like that. Yeah. Norway.
I remember that Adele got very angry. And do you remember when she said that she finally earned like all this money and she'd been gigging around Camden and places like that? And then she said, and then half of it just went.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, people are always writing these things in the paper about me. I think that's how she'd be.
Yeah.
People are always writing
Michael
these things.
Gove?
Yeah, it could be. And then she was like, and they say that I'm worth like 7 million, and I'm not. I only get like 3.5 million, and then I've got to give some to here, give some there. I end up with about like 50 quid. And so, yeah, it does disincentivise. And now she's in Vegas.
Now she's using a food bank, so which aren't. I mean, I was shocked to find out. I went to actually invest some sausages, and I found out that's not how they work.
No, but Adele doesn't eat anymore. She stopped eating in 2020. She looks fabulous.
Good for her.
Yeah, too right. I mean, it obviously is a bit of a slow motion car crash, isn't it, for Liz Truss? But she's got to stand her ground. She can't do a U-turn on this, can she?
Yeah, exactly. You can't like your first thing when you come into office, you can't just suddenly flip-flop and show that sort of spinelessness. Also, I mean, I think that the market's overreacted. That wasn't, you know, factored in. Nobody saw that coming. So now that that's all calmed down, and actually the pound's rebounded to a pretty decent place. I think it's actually better than it was before. So now that everything's calmed down, we can actually see if these policies work and if they attract more high-income people to the UK or to England, because Scotland doesn't have these tax cuts. I've known Scottish people who are talking about moving. It's not that far to move. It's just an hour over the border to take advantage of lower tax.
Well, there's talk of a brain drain from Edinburgh, from Glasgow, from Paris, Frankfurt and Madrid.
Yeah.
You know, and so
that's
if
a Right Said Fred song.
Just a bit. If all of that can kick in by the next election, then she could go from zero to hero.
Absolutely, yeah. And obviously, I mean, a week's a long time in politics, so she's got a year and a half until the election, at least. So yeah, might be fine for her.
Too right. OK, well, let's have a look at the Mirror. And Liz Truss admits that she should have done a better job, Leo.
Yeah, so Liz Truss refused to back down from her plan and failed 8 times to rule out cutting benefits in the state, but admitted that she learned from the market chaos. We've got a headline there saying Truss is finished. I don't know who said that, but yeah, basically, I mean, she should be cutting.
A senior Tory. It sounds like Michael Gove.
Yeah, probably Michael Gove. Basically, what she should have done, instead of announcing the tax cuts, she should have announced the tax cuts, and instead of just saying, oh, we're going to pay for them with £72 billion of borrowing, say we're going to pay for them with all these cuts in the public sector. So, you know, there's so much that can be cut in the public sector. The benefit system is totally broken. It's so complex that only people who treat it as a career can actually work the benefit system to get any money out of it. The asylum system is broken. You know, everybody knows that if you come here, you're going to have state-funded lawyers to make sure you stay here. We've got equality, diversity, and inclusion departments in every state organisation, and it's like, why does the NHS need an equality, diversity, and inclusion department? Yeah. Are there that many racist, neo-Nazi, KKK managers in the NHS? I really don't think there are. It's incredibly diverse.
The Daily Sceptic newspaper, based upon a Freedom of Information request, found out that one hospital is paying 2 security guards £150,000 a year to hand out hand sanitizer and masks at the entrance of one particular hospital.
I'm sorry, £150,000 a year?
Yeah, for two operatives to hand out all of that stuff.
Easily,
and I doubt they're getting all of it themselves, but through an agency, right?
Through an agency, so there's a huge markup on top of their actual salaries. And quite often, what we saw, I mean, I worked in consultancy before I became a comedian, and honestly, the stuff I saw in the public sector was funnier. There are people. One organisation we were sent in to sort of restructure. The person running the IT department also had an agency who, you know, hired IT workers. So he was saying his department was hiring lots of people from his own agency. So it was like Putin-esque, just feathering his own nest. So he had a total incentive to hire as many people as he could from his own agency, because he's getting, you know, 30 grand or whatever for each one in his pocket. There's also, I mean, the Arts Council can go. Anytime the government gets involved in creating art, it's terrible.
Whoa. Let's maybe keep the Arts Council.
No, it can go.
Why?
Because look at all this stuff. Look at all the people who get grants. It just means that the people... So in comedy, comedians can now get their snout in the trough with the Arts Council, but it's just the people who can fill in forms and tick boxes and all that sort of stuff. And they're not the funny people.
And who aren't funny enough to sell tickets.
They're not... Yeah, exactly. They're not good enough to make it on their own in the meritocracy of the marketplace, but they're good at filling in forms. Those people should get real jobs. If you can fill in a form, get a real job. Don't be an artist. Don't be a comedian. That's a nonsense.
Some people do have, like, for example, disabilities.
Yeah, so get a job as a paperweight. I mean, what on earth?
Leo?
Like, why should they... What does that mean? Some people have disabilities,
Yeah,
so the government should pay them to be artists.
No, I'm not saying that just because somebody has a disability, the government should pay them to be an artist, but in terms of giving people, like, giving everybody an opportunity to try and fulfill what they determine as themselves and to be...
Oh, so they self-identify as an artist, and we've got to pay...
Everybody who is an artist self-identifies as an artist. You self-identify as an artist.
I sell tickets. I sell tickets. The people buying my tickets identify as people who buy tickets. So I don't need to identify as anything. If you can sell tickets, fine, do it. Make some money in the marketplace. If you can't, don't scrounge off the government. Go and get a job.
So you don't think there's anybody who, like, what about the working class comedians?
Like me.
Who can't afford... Yeah, but like there was a whole group of working class comedians who won a prize at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival because they couldn't afford to go to the Fringe.
Of course they can afford to go to the Fringe. It's a nonsense. All this stuff, I can't afford, I need all this. And all the people who identify as working class comedians, none of them are actually working class. It's a total nonsense. Like
They are!
No, they're not.
I met them.
No, the whole like fringe working class thing it's
well, half of them have got famous dads who are already comedians.
Exactly, a lot of them were.
Don't you wind him up?
I know of a self-identifying working class comedian whose parents gave them a house. That's not somebody who's poor. It's just become another thing. Especially if you're white, you've got no other diversity box to tick. You can say, oh, I'm working class. I just did it a moment ago. I'm not working class. I've got credit cards. I know how to use cutlery.
Well, I tell you what, sparks are flying tonight. Diane, let's talk about something much calmer, the housing market.
Oh, this is... Yeah, no.
Oops.
So this story is from The Guardian, and UK house buyers are, quote, left powerless as, end quote, as mortgage deals hang in the balance. So this article covers the situation, and it covers different people in different situations. So 40% of mortgage products were withdrawn, so there is significantly less choice for people out there. And now there's less choice in terms not only of sort of buying a home for the first time, but actually keeping the home you've already bought, because your deal may have changed radically because of what has happened and the interest rates going up. You may no longer be able to afford something. And this article gives different examples of how the different people are in different circumstances and they're responding in different ways. It reveals, that there are buying chains that are collapsing. There are people awaiting approval on the new mortgage situations. Some have just given up. Some have just said, OK, we were going to move, but there's no point now because it's just going to be too much to work out. And some of the banks are withdrawing the pre-agreed mortgage offers, which I think is pretty terrible, because if you've pre-agreed it, people have... These are massive decisions. Already moving is one of the most stressful things you can do after sitting next to Leo at this desk.
Yeah.
But... and then they go through sort of the different things where how much extra it might cost you using the percentage rates. For example, on the 1st of September, NatWest were offering a rate of 3.59% fixed for 2 years. But on the 1st of October, that changed to 4.39%. So that means over a year, you're going to pay 960 quid more. Yeah. So it really is quite a very serious situation. It means that sort of everything is slowed down because people can't move, people need to sort of hold fast. And if people are holding fast where they are and their money has got less value, it's all very well like Liz Truss making all these changes and she's saying, yes, but people will have more money. But people do need more money now, and we're about to go into winter, and people are about to get very, very cold.
Well, yes, it's a perfect storm, isn't it, of rising energy prices and rising mortgage costs. And that has to be a worry for the economy, Leo.
Yeah, I mean, so much of UK wealth, the wealth we feel, well, people who own houses feel. I don't feel it because I don't own a house because I didn't get up to my eyeballs in debt. If I'd known, for a decade and a half now, the government's just been bailing out profligate borrowers who got, big mortgages. And if I'd known that profligate borrowers were going to get bailed out every step of the way and quantitative easing was going to steal money from my savings instead of rising interest rates, maybe giving savers some money back, then I would have got up to my eyeballs in debt as well. And I think the government's just going to bail out borrowers again. And yeah, I mean, it's a real shame that people, there's a slight delay in people rushing headlong into unmanageable loans. But they might be grateful of these delays to their mortgages in a year or two when everybody else is trapped in negative equity.
Well, it could be. I mean, I think the issue with the mortgages is that it sucks money out of the economy, doesn't it? Disposable income. The whole of our economy is, or 60% anyway, based on consumption, disposable income, and that's why it's a real worry.
Yeah.
However, this is the new normal. The interest rates are going to be higher, and Liz Truss or no Liz Truss, that was always the direction of travel.
Yeah, at some point, we've had all these years of constant quantitative easing, just inflationary expansion, and for every pound that's printed takes, reduces the value of all the pounds in existence. So at some point, we're going to have to roll back and raise interest rates and deal with the actual underlying issues. So finally, it looks like it's come home to roost. I don't know if people are having so much trouble finding houses. Why don't we build more houses? And, if we can't build more houses, why don't we stop extra people coming to the UK? The people coming across the channel in dinghies, they're not bringing houses with them.
Yeah,
fair enough. True. If they have to bring a house with them, then, that might work.
Could they not bring in some kind of rule where you can't own more than a certain number of properties? Has that never been sort of thought of? Because there are some people who have a property portfolio, and there are some people who have nothing.
So do you mean people shouldn't be allowed to be landlords?
No, just not landlords over a certain amount. Because some people have a ridiculous number of houses.
People shouldn't be allowed to be successful landlords.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
If we've got somebody who's good at being a landlord, they shouldn't be allowed to do it.
Are there any good landlords, though?
Yeah, of course there are good landlords.
Are there?
Yeah,
I've never met
my landlord is fantastic. Any problem with the flat, they sort it out.
My mate's landlord, he just walks into her flat whenever he feels like it, and that is actually illegal.
Yeah, that's illegal. So she wants to get some locks on that door.
Well, yeah, but the problem is she'll just be evicted because, that's the way it goes. So
she'll be evicted for what? You can't just evict someone for.
He will. He will. So it's because it's all very cut and dried. You can say it's illegal and things like that, which it is. But when it comes down to the real life situation, he'll just oust her and get somebody else in. So a lot of the landlords that I've experienced have not been good.
If I was her, I'd move out anyway. I mean, that's somebody walking into your flat.
Oh, it's not ideal.
They get a shock if they walked in at my flat unannounced. You know what I mean?
It'd be a rare treat.
I like letting it hang loose.
Wearing that lovely red velvet jacket.
And nothing else.
Thank you. Can I ask you very briefly, do you think that there's a crisis in capitalism coming?
I think there has been for a while, and we've seen across the developing world, across the Western world and the developing world, the portion of GDP that's taken up by the public sector is increasing steadily. And this is a worrying thing. It's the frog is being slowly boiled because capitalism is productive and delivers and does for people what they want, whereas the public sector does what some bored apparatchik thinks you want, and that's not what.
Well, I think we're getting close to the point now where all income tax goes to the NHS, just the entirety of income tax to the Treasury.
So to get your money's worth, you've got to break an arm several times a year.
Well, that's the plan. Diane, what is the Tavistock Centre and why is it in the news?
Oh, my word. So the Tavistock Centre was... OK, so a Christian nurse, this is in the Daily Mail, is suing the controversial Tavistock and Portman NHS Trust.
OK.
So not the centre, the centre's closed, the trust for forcing racist ideology on students in a lecture entitled Whiteness a problem of our time. Now, I don't like this title at all, being as it says that I am a problem of the time. And I think that's really rude, because I'm not. I'm trying my very best to make this place better than I found it. So this all comes down to critical race theory, which is the idea that the theory says that racism is institutional and rejects the notion of a colourblind approach. So a colourblind approach is where you just go, I don't care what colour people are. Can you do the job? Who are you? What do you stand for? And you treat somebody as a person, as a human being. Critical race theory rejects that and says whether you like it or not, you're a racist. According to this person, especially if you're white, which I find really rude and ironically racist. So
it is racist.
It is racist. So Amy Gallagher, who has been working for 7 years as a nurse, was forced to attend this lecture. And she said, look, I don't judge people based on their skin. I just adopt a colourblind approach. She was told this approach was outdated. I am just confused. And then then it was escalated because an external speaker complained to the Nursing and Midwifery Council that Miss Gallagher had inflicted race-based harm and as a result could not work with diverse populations. I'm sorry, but inflicting race-based harm is when a racist punches someone. That is inflicting race-based harm. This is literally a woman just saying, I really don't care what colour you are. Yeah. I'm going to talk to you. Let's sort out, let's give birth to the baby. Let's do your thing. And this is just absolutely appalling. So she's suing the NHS Trust. And this is a very controversial trust anyway, because these were the people who had the clinic. They had
Transgender clinic.
Yes, the controversial child transgender clinic. Yeah. And it was shut down because, ironically, it was found to be not safe for children. You don't say. How odd. So, yes, that's what this article is about in the Daily Mail.
And this shows that these are the people who are supposed to be keeping us safe from the racists. You know, this is equality, diversity and inclusion.
If these are the people you're firing, I'm with you, yeah.
Yeah, these are the people our taxes are being spent on these people to tell us we're terrible and to enforce completely racist ideology on us. And it's counterproductive. You know, she's obviously a perfectly competent nurse who treats everybody evenly and equally because she's a nice person. That's what almost everybody does these days. I mean, I never seem to meet, for all that people talk about, you know, Britain being a cesspit of racism, I never seem to meet any of them. And, apparently, you know, I'd be the sort of person who'd meet a lot of them, but I never seem to do. So she's obviously a good nurse, and our taxes are being spent on disrupting her work, making her life a misery, and spending more of our taxes on defending this court case. So whoever, I don't think we even need a court case. I think these people can just be summarily executed in the town square.
Find it hard to disagree. Our great institutions are being infiltrated by this toxic ideology, and it's got to stop. And here on GB News, we're happy to call it out. Lots more to come. Why Prince Andrew is continuing to cause headaches for the royals, why first-class trains could be a thing of the past, and why young men don't like the idea of women's rights. See you shortly.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark Dolan, and this is Headliners, your first look at tomorrow's papers, tonight in the company of the hugely talented Leo Kearse and Diane Spencer. Monday's Mail shows us that just over 20 years ago, the armed forces still had views we would now consider old-fashioned, Leo.
Yeah, so Dame Kelly Holmes is calling on LGBTQ plus veterans whose lives were ruined under the forces' ban on homosexuality to provide evidence. So she's a former Olympic athlete who came out as gay in June. This is the first time I heard about that. But she's urging ex-soldiers to give proof to an independent probe into the scandal which left queer servicemen and women stripped of their honours, military pensions, discharged and even jailed. It was illegal for members of the LGBTQ community to serve until the year 2000. I had no idea.
Crazy.
No idea. I mean, I thought it'd be like, maybe the 80s, but yeah, right up until 2000. And yeah, I mean, it seems ridiculous, particularly considering, during army training, you're expected to handle a hard weapon. You might have to come up the rear.
Where's this going?
You're going to shoot loads.
Yeah, correct. You'll need to be on all fours at a certain point.
Absolutely. If
brown stuff on your face.
An enemy combatant.
I think I went too far.
If an enemy combatant jumps on you, you'll have to pull him off. So there's
Care to pick up the thread, Diane?
Oh, I'm good. No, I was just thinking about how sad it was. I'm so sorry. I wasn't sat there making puns, and I kind of wish I had now.
We'll have to pull you
that's
off.
a good point. It is sad as well.
It is.
Yeah, it's sad. it's bad that they did that.
Yeah, but just because, just because of everything that's been going on, and you do see the footage on the news. I'm so sorry to bring the tone down. And when you see on,
I think you're actually bringing it up.
Am I?
Yeah.
And you see, how scary it is, and how brave these people are. And these brave people went out there, and you should be judged on what you did on the battlefield, not what you did in bed. Correct. And you know what? How dare you take a medal away from somebody who went out there and put their life on the line?
Yeah.
Yeah, and people have got time to apply because the deadline is November the 15th, and this review is being led by Lord Etherton. So if you're out there, you've got time. You've got time to give that evidence, even if it's just telling your story.
Yeah. Definitely, a very cruel policy. Monday's Telegraph now, and young men are apparently less accepting of women than older men. Diane, women's rights.
Okay, yeah. So this is a study which surveys 32,000 people across the EU's 27 countries, and it shows that men under 30 are less accepting of women's rights.
Good lads.
So the respondents were asked to state to what extent they agree with the statement that promoting women's and girls' rights has gone too far because it threatens men's and boys' opportunities. And the results show that the men aged 18 to 29, now bear in mind this was done over 27 EU countries, 32,000 people responded. It's not a very big survey if you think about the number of countries involved.
Yes.
And they said, yes, it does interfere. And the idea goes is that originally the men were just competing with other men for jobs, but now the men have to compete with the women. And again, it comes down to that thing, well, who's better qualified for the job? Who is better at what they do? And so there's a lot of young men, and especially in places where unemployment is quite high, a lot of young men are like, Well, yeah, I think that women shouldn't be allowed to work because they don't want the woman to get the job. They're like, I would be much better at that job than that lady. No, clearly. I mean, a nail technician, yes, much better than that lady. Wow, that is a sexist thing in itself, isn't it? The example I picked, I could have said doctor.
But I don't even think it's that. I think it's, you know, society just consistently tells men they're awful and they're terrible, whereas it tells women, oh, you're so empowered, you can do anything.
No,
let's uplift women. Let's make women empowered. And
that is such a lie. It really doesn't.
It does.
No, it doesn't.
As a young man.
As a young woman, well, I don't. Can we call ourselves young?
Well, there is this expression, toxic masculinity. There's no female equivalent, is there?
Well, but there should be, because, like, if anything we learned from the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case, do you know what? Weirdly, and this sounds very gross, but the rise of the female con artist has certainly told me that women are now on a more equal footing with men. Like, you've got Elizabeth Holmes, who had the Theranos scandal. You've got Dr. Ruja, who did the OneCoin scandal, who, like, stole billions of money. She's, like, on the top 10 Interpol list, you know? I mean, the women are climbing high, but...
all the sort of feminist moves to sort of get more women into the workplace, it's always... They want the nice jobs. They just want, you know, the glass ceiling. They're always talking about breaking the glass ceiling into, you know, the corporate world and stuff like that. Never into the sewers or into bin lorries. You know, men are still expected to go out and do, you know, most of the sort of fighting and catching fish from the sea, going down and mining stuff out of the ground. Those are, you know, why don't we get men? Why don't we go into schools and teach young girls that you can be a sewage worker?
No, we know we can. We just don't want to.
Well, yeah, but you've got to, because it's called equality. So, and I think it was sending a good message to these young men, and they might, you know, look more kindly on female empowerment if you're getting some dirt under your manicured finger.
Now you're talking. I'll sign up for that. Monday's mail. Let's have some light relief, shall we? Prince Andrew, Leo.
Yeah, so Prince Andrew, definitely my favourite prince. So his security staff were so terrified of him, because he was in the army, so he's, you know, you can be scared of him even if you're a bodyguard. They were so terrified of him, they let a Spanish woman pretending to be his fiancée into Royal Lodge grounds because they didn't want to upset him by asking if he was expecting guests.
I love this woman.
So yeah, this is somebody who blagged their way in. She said her name was Irene Windsor. She was a Spanish woman in her 40s. She said she was the prince's fiancée. I mean, that's quite an you'd think they'd know. You know, a fiancée is quite specific.
She's hiding in plain sight.
But yeah, and this was former security guard of Prince Andrew speaking at the International Security Expo in Kensington Olympia. He said that Andrew was a pain in the bum. I don't think I can say the actual word he said. And for anyone who worked with him, an unpleasant character. I mean, but he's talking about this woman sneaking into his lodge. She's 46. What about what you saw on Epstein Island? That's what we want to know. What did you see? I don't want to know if he was grumpy, moody to work with, didn't respond well to questions. What did you see on Epstein Island?
Yeah, spill the beans. About whether Andrew spilled the beans that night. Let's now look at the Times, and it's Monday's Times. It looks like young people are the ones fighting to protect our heritage, Diane.
Yes, so young National Trust member is fighting to make its trendy agenda history. So this story in the Times is about a campaigner, Zuditu Gabru-Hanes, and she's 23, and she's created a group called Restore Trust. And her focus is on the National Trust, and she believes that it's not working properly. And she absolutely loves preservation. She loves the history of Britain and the British Isles. And she's just annoyed that the National Trust seems to be more focused on commissioning reports into sort of colonialism and slave-owning provenance rather than, and they're sacking conservators. And also she's very annoyed that they're letting some of the National Trust sites fall into disrepair. And so she started this group, and the goal is to return the National Trust back to its founding aim and ethos. And she gives a great example. Clarendon Park in Surrey was apparently gutted by a fire in April 2015, but rather than restoring it following a multi-million-pound insurance payout, the Trust is going to conserve it as a ruin.
Right.
What?
Yeah, we're going to conserve this as something that's not being conserved.
Pile of ashes.
Yeah.
Well, where is that multi-million insurance pound payout gone? You can't insure something, and then when it gets burnt to the smoke, just take the money and go, Oh yeah, we're just going to leave that. What? No, you rebuild it.
No.
So she's making a load. Her group is called Restore Trust. If anybody's interested, and you can sort of join that group and help sort of bring back the national trust.
Yeah, we won't hold our breath. Can we finish the part with first-class travel, Leo? Mail on Sunday.
Yes.
Daily
Mail. So Southeastern Trains, which is now nationalised, it's state-run now, I believe, is going to end premium tickets, end first-class tickets, as the Department for Transport orders companies to find savings. So train travel still hasn't gone back to what it was before the pandemic. There's still lower numbers than before because some people are working from home, even if it's just a day or two a week. So they run Southeastern Trains, which runs 1,500 services from Sussex to Kent. I mean, they do other routes. It's not just Sussex to Kent. That's the area that they cover. They only had 20. I didn't realise this. They only had 28 annual season ticket holders that were first class.
What do you get in first class on a train?
I've travelled in first class in some trains, and it's good. Like if you go to Glasgow, I mean, it's not good when you get there, but like on the way on first class, you get like booze. Which gets you into the spirit for being in Glasgow, and you get food. They come around with hot food, and it's nice. And they come.
If you travel in the morning, it's a full English, I think.
Yeah.
And is the food included in the price?
It's more. Like the first class ticket is more, so that's what you're paying for.
Right.
You get a bigger seat. It's nice. And
most importantly, there's a little strip of fabric on the headrest. That's why I like to pay the big bucks.
It's hygienic, so you're not getting somebody else's head grease on the back of your head. And you get like little fancy luxury chocolates, and you can ask for more stuff anytime they come round, and they're not stingy with it either.
But are they doing that in Sussex to Kent? Because whenever I see the first class people, they're always just sat in a different bit.
Oh yeah, no, this will be terrible. This is Southeastern Trains. I mean, for a start, it won't be a train. You'll be on a bus. So yeah.
Well, there are certain rail routes where really what first class is just a guaranteed seat. It actually doesn't look any different to the rest of the train.
Really? Is that what it is?
You get your bit of fabric on the headrest, just says first class, but not much else.
Right.
But on a packed commuter train, it's a blessing to get that seat, and that's what first class is. But I mean, is this progress actually to get rid of this terrible inequality, Leo?
Well, yeah, I mean, it would seem to be, and if the market is speaking and saying, like, look, we don't care about first class. Out of all these 1,500 services, they sold 28 first class tickets. I mean, that's the annual season tickets, but 28, which is nothing. So people obviously don't want it. So yeah, let everybody get jammed in like cattle. That's what they want.
Have you ever travelled first class on a train?
Never on a train. I have travelled. I think it was business class on a flight because I was flying out to do an advert, and that was fun. But whenever I see like the first class on the train, I always just think you don't even get a bag of peanuts or anything. It doesn't look.
No,
fun.
you do. Well, on the proper networks, you do. I've only done it a couple of times, and I tell you what, it's great for when you've got work to do.
Yeah,
because it tends to be, it's all kind of a professional environment. And a lot of people in first class, they're not rich or anything. It's just that they probably work for a company that has provided them with a first class ticket so they can work, which is what the company wants them to do.
Yeah, man, you got to be in with the people. That's how you get the vibes, so you can get your Arts Council funding.
Now you're talking. There you go. Well, look, we're travelling first class with both Diane and Leo tonight. Lots more stories to get through. In part 2, we're looking into big brain science, understanding consciousness, phobias, and why people have affairs. See you in 2.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, We're
on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
This is Headliners, your first look at tomorrow's papers with me, Mark Dolan, and helping me reflect on the big stories of tomorrow are Leo Kearse and Diane Spencer. We start with The Independent, and someone is offended over a Netflix film. Who'd have thought it, Diane?
So the model, Emily Ratajkowski, accuses the Marilyn Monroe biopic Blonde of fetishizing female pain. So Emily is a very, very popular model. I think I would go as far as to say she is a modern supermodel. And she wrote a book called My Body, which is all about how her body, because obviously it's a commodity, because she is a model, so she sort of does all of that all the time, and she sort of reveals what it's like to sort of be gazed upon all the time, and how you're sold and how you're marketed. But she says that people have a preoccupation with the lives and deaths of female figures. And she cites people like Amy Winehouse, Britney Spears, Princess Diana. And she says, we love to fetishize female pain. We obsess over dead girls and serial killers. Now, what I found interesting about this is that I've listened to a very interesting series about the 5 women who were killed by Jack the Ripper. And what was really interesting, it was written by a woman called Hallie Rubenhold, because she wrote a book about it, is that when you think about the 5 women who were killed by Jack the Ripper, they are the least dead. It brings in this concept of the most dead and the least dead. The least dead are people like prostitutes. They're the least dead. They're poor, they probably brought it on themselves, and they are fetishized. It's like when you see these films about Jack the Ripper, the prostitutes are always just these big bosom people. Go on, lovely, I'll do you for free. They're all like that, and they're all very, and you think, oh yes, here comes mysterious Jack. And everybody thinks about Jack the Ripper. Whereas actually, what that book did was delve into the lives of these people, and no, they weren't all sex workers, and they all had individual, interesting histories. And I think this article kind of echoes that, because it's kind of the way it's sort of turning it into a sort of a grotesque, a fetishization, and also it's because it's only on the beautiful women.
Right.
Like, if an ugly woman dies, she's less dead.
But this whole, I mean, everything that she's saying, we obsess over dead girls and serial killers and beautiful women, it's like, yeah, obviously. We're going to obsess over, we're going to think about stuff like that because it's more interesting. We're not going to think about, Maureen from Accounts who's still alive, because what's interesting about that? Oh, she gets up every day and she goes to work. Oh, wow, tell me more about this. No, we want to know about Jack the Ripper, or whatever it is, Jeffrey Dahmer, something
and
like
also,
that.
isn't this woman biting the hand that feeds her, given the fact that her beauty has opened a lot of doors for her professionally?
That was a slight critique of her book, because people were like, oh, right, so she's not quite subverting the male gaze because she relies upon it to earn her income.
See, if she was just like a human rights lawyer that was sick of people talking about her outfits and her good looks, I would get that.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much, that's been a big part of what she does for a living, especially being a model.
Yeah, definitely. But it is interesting. I would recommend, if a story like this, if you read this article in The Independent and this interests you, I would definitely look up The 5, which is the book by Hallie Rubenhold. That was really interesting.
Worth a read. Let's move on now to The Independent, and let's talk about adultery. Is it the new norm, Leo?
So this is a sort of opinion piece in The Independent about all the people who commit adultery. So Liz Truss committed adultery, Prince Charles committed adultery. I'm not calling him King Charles, he's still Prince Charles. Lots of celebrities have done it. They ask, why don't we care about the awfulness?
Have you just cancelled the king?
You can't transition from being a prince to a king. I've known him my whole life, all of my 27 years. He's been Prince Charles, and he's going to stay Prince Charles.
There goes your slot at the Royal Variety Performance.
I think we should. It's time for Andrew.
Is that right? King Andrew.
King Andrew. I like that. That's got a ring to it, doesn't it?
I think people have said that in the past. King Andrew.
The Andruvian era. What would it be called? Apparently we're in the Carolian era, which doesn't sound anything like. Anyway, getting back to this thing. So loads of people have been cheating. Maroon 5 singer Adam Levine cheated on his wife, which people were surprisingly not that upset about. You know, they were like, well, he's cheated on his wife, but he's a rock star. I mean, to be honest, I'm more upset at his music, which is absolutely dreadful. And I can't believe anybody would cheat. I can't believe he got married in the first place. Has she got ears? You're going to have to listen to Maroon 5 the rest of your life. You're probably first dance at your wedding, it's going to be Maroon 5. And then somebody else cheats. Has she got ears as well? Like, what is the appeal of this terrible man? Liz Truss had an 18-month affair that, people don't seem to be bothered about. So this guy's just asking, why is nobody bothered? Why is nobody bothered? He sounds bitter because the writer has stayed faithful, and everybody else hasn't.
Nervous cough. In the age of Tinder, Diane, what is the point of monogamy?
Because you're in a team. It's great. When you find the person you love, it's just amazing.
What if your teammates are minger or let themselves go?
Yeah, but they're not a minger to you.
Time for an upgrade. Come on, Diane.
Minger is what you perceive.
Out with the old, in with the new.
Minger is in the eye of the beholder. Okay. And when you find your
don't get a minger in your eye, I'll tell you.
What people do now is ethical non-monogamy, and this is so everybody's got like 6 boyfriends or 6 girlfriends.
Polyamory
and this is why monkeypox is spreading like wildfire.
No. Honestly,
polyamory.
There's so many benefits.
I wonder what those lumps were.
To being in love, because then you've got your best friend, you've got your lover, the brilliant person. You can go on adventures together. Yeah, but it's all one person.
Oh, I see.
It's amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, look,
I think we'd be sick.
I think she's been on the wacky backy again, hasn't she? Who knew? Too long in the green room. The Guardian next, and we're advised to carry on screaming. Are you a screamer, Diane?
Well, that is another benefit of monogamy. So The Guardian leads with carry on screaming, why letting it all out, especially for women, can make you calmer and happier. Now, this article sort of focuses on the fact that there is that screaming and sort of just raising your voice and going a bit mad can actually raise your endorphins. It can raise the feel-good hormones. It triggers a proper response in your brain, and you just feel great and wonderful. And there are several ways you can achieve this. Now, she does talk about screaming in your garden. Now, I would say, yeah, maybe...
She must have a big garden.
Well, yeah, I've got a little garden. I wouldn't scream in it because I have many, many neighbours, and I don't think they'd appreciate it. But I would recommend, if you can find one, maybe a nice soundproof room, but a really good one, drive with your music on, sing really loudly, sing at the top of your lungs, because that's a perfect place to be noisy, in your car, on the motorway, just going for it.
I think you should bottle it up. Just bottle it up and force it down. Diamonds are created under pressure. So you
and hernias, I reckon.
Don't express any of that anger.
She gives you an exercise you can do called the shaking tree exercise, where you sort of wiggle yourself and then you sort of weighs everything up. But one thing that is interesting, again, is that there is a gender divide in this article. It seems to be a running theme where sort of if a woman screams, she's hysterical, she needs to be slapped. She's essentially, she's mad, she's lost control. If a man screams, it's because he's determined, he's strong, it's his battle cry. And
no, if a man screams, then it's worse than a woman. If a man's like, ah!
Yeah, but it depends. No, you're thinking ah! But she means ah!
Right.
I mean, if I was and you were yeah, everybody would be confused. But what would you do, Mark? If he was see, you do high, I'll do
Well, that sounded a bit orgasmic, actually. So I'm in. All day long. My goodness, I've lost my professional detachment. Let's look at the Telegraph now. And the woke police are in full force again, Leo.
Yeah, so nicknames are banned from a Second World War memorial because they risk causing offence. This isn't a countrywide ban, by the way. This is it just relates to one particular war memorial. So there's a memorial to 9 servicemen of Wychbold, who died in the 1939-45 conflict, also known as World War II. It currently says Patrick Collins because the guy was called Pat Collins.
Yeah.
Turns out Pat was a nickname and his real name was Kenneth.
Right.
So somebody, a local parishioner, has found out that this wasn't his real name and has paid out of his own money for the plaque to be replaced with Kenneth Collins with Pat in brackets in the middle.
Nice.
To signify that, he was nicknamed Pat. But this judge, who's sort of waded into it, has said, yes, you can change it, but in future we're not going to have any more nicknames because it could offend other people who don't have their nicknames allowed. It's not like, you're going to have, Carrot Fingers Tommy or whatever. Like it does sort of bring down, if you have people's actual real nicknames, it's going to bring down the tone of the war memorial. And also some of the nicknames themselves. When we're talking about the 1930s, so some people might have had some nicknames that aren't quite right by...
No.
I mean, well, we all know what the dog in Dambusters was called.
Un-PC, you mean?
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean.
By the way, do you know someone called Carrot Fingers Tommy?
No, I made that up. But I do. I went to school.
I'm very happily married, but if I was going to have an affair, I probably would throw all my hat in the ring of Carrot Fingers Tommy. I think that would
I went to school with a guy with one arm shorter than the other, and we called him Clock.
Nicely done. That poor man. Let's have a look now at The Guardian and A Guide to Phobias. Have you got any phobias, Diane?
I do, actually. I have a proper... no.
Islam?
No. I have a phobia. I'm a spider person, so I've got the whole arachnophobia going on. So in The Guardian, they they detail the top 10 phobias and what they reveal about the strangeness of life. And essentially, this article covers a small history of phobias, where the word was used. And it says to be diagnosed, the fear must be excessive, unreasonable, last for 6 months or more, and it must interfere with normal life. And believe me, when there's a spider in my bathroom, it definitely interferes with my husband's normal life because I don't leave him alone until he escorts it from the building. And it goes into the top 10. There are some very interesting ones here. Kayaks. Is one of them, which is very strange. Frogs, the number 4.
The number 4 looks like it's goose stepping, so I can understand that.
What?
It looks like a goose stepping triangle.
Oh, you think that's what it is?
Yeah.
The big thing with frogs is people are afraid to touch a frog, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, but that's just because they're gross.
It's the texture of the frog.
If you're getting some sort of poison from it for your blow dart.
The idea is that...
I haven't had a blow dart in a long time.
Some people lick them.
Okay.
Like the frogs. Some of them are psychedelic.
Okay.
The idea is that the phobias are something that evolves culturally. So one of the arguments they give is, for example, clowns. Clown phobia is very prevalent in the US. In the 1980s, there were photographs of John Wayne Gacy in his clown costume, and he was a murderer of many, many people. And Stephen
But what a way to go, by the way, at the hands of a clown.
At least you'd be laughing.
That's it.
Yeah.
You laugh at clowns.
At least their final moments.
You literally die laughing.
Were pleasurable, yeah.
It's a privilege.
And then obviously Stephen King brought out It, and that had a terrifying clown in it. So then a whole generation developed this fear of clowns. But my question is, at no point in this article does it say how to implant a phobia in someone. That would be more interesting to me.
Yeah, now you're talking. I couldn't agree with you more. Can I thank the brilliant Diane Spencer, the marvellous Leo Curse, and also Carrot Fingers Tommy, if you're watching. Listen, hit me up on social media. Let's talk. I'm trapped in a loveless marriage. Let's go. Of course, Headliners is a successful franchise. We're stripped across the week, 11 o'clock every night. And so thanks for your company. And Headliners is back tomorrow at 11. Dan Wootton's back tomorrow at 9. And I'm in the hot seat on Thursday at 9. Of course, Mark Dolan tonight.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate, and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for big guests, big opinions, and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Protesters take to the streets over the cost of living crisis. Labour extend their poll lead over the Tories, but are plagued with accusations of racism. And Sussex police defend a sex offender from the distress of being misgendered. This is Free Speech Nation. Welcome to the show. Over the past few days, there have been many protests in cities throughout the UK under the banner of Enough is Enough. Their goals have been clearly stated and expressed. The protesters are calling for a real pay rise, for energy bills to be slashed, for an end to food poverty, for decent housing for all, and for greater taxation on the wealthy. Debates over the cost of living crisis are, of course, endless. Economists have argued back and forth over whether Liz Truss's plan to grow the economy through tax cuts will have the desired impact, or whether they'll just benefit those with the most money. These protesters clearly take the view that the government's approach will be catastrophic. Some of the placards make it clear that some of those in attendance absolutely hate this government and would like to see it collapse. And so it's reassuring that they are able to express that view, because we live in a free country, and the hallmark of a functioning and healthy democracy is the right to peaceful protest. And whenever I see peaceful protests, irrespective of whether I agree with the protesters or not, I am reassured, because it means that for all the threats to free speech we currently face, we're still holding on to the right to assemble. This is also why I've been such a vocal opponent of the government's Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, which was published in March last year. Now, this bill puts the onus on police to determine whether or not a protest should be allowed to go ahead, and even says that protests should be banned for being too loud or causing serious annoyance. Too loud. Protests are often loud. It's very difficult to tiptoe when you're carrying a placard. And what does serious annoyance mean? Protests will always annoy someone, otherwise there'd be no point. The language of this bill is hopelessly vague and open to exploitation. If the noise from a peaceful protest is deemed to have relevant impact on other citizens that may be significant, it could be shut down under this new law. And who gets to decide what's significant? Well, the Home Office. But what if the subject of the protest is the government itself? Surely there could be a conflict of interest there. Now, recently we saw anti-monarchist protesters arrested for holding up signs saying "Not my king." At least one of those arrests took place under the auspices of the new Police Crime and Sentencing Bill. And while the strength of feeling at the time of the Queen's death is understandable, the erosion of civil liberties can never be excused. The way we deal with those we find intolerant is through criticism, ridicule, sometimes counter-protest. Well, once you start supporting the state, arresting those you disagree with, you're setting a really dangerous precedent that could very well one day be used against the causes that you support. To give a concrete example of this, after what became known as the Battle of Cable Street on 4th of October 1936, where Oswald Molesley's black shirts were intercepted by anti-fascist demonstrators as they attempted to march through the East End of London, the Labour Party was instrumental in urging Parliament to rush through public order legislation to stop further uprisings by the far right. And yet, since their inception, these measures have mostly been used to crack down on left-wing activism. And in fact, they form the basis of the government's justification to arrest striking miners in the mid-1980s. And the lesson ought to be clear. If you grant the state the powers to restrict freedom of assembly and freedom of speech, you won't be able to predict how such powers are exploited in the future. And the same goes for hate speech laws. In 2012, the European Court of Human Rights concluded there is no universally accepted definition of the expression hate speech. And a manual published by UNESCO in 2015 accepted that the possibility of reaching a universally shared definition seems unlikely. And if you look at the various hate speech laws across Europe, it's clear that no one knows how it ought to be defined. As a result, you end up with people being arrested for jokes, or for quoting rap lyrics, or for retweeting memes. These laws are really dangerous, and they ought to be scrapped. But of course, our current government is pushing through their online safety bill, which is only going to make matters worse. So why did the government feel the need to crack down on protests? Well, partly it was because of a worrying trend that has escalated over the past few years. People have started to excuse violent protests because they are convinced that their cause is so righteous that anything can be justified. We've had environmental activists who have started to cause criminal damage. In last year, March, there were 3 members of Extinction Rebellion prosecuted for vandalising a number of buildings at Cambridge University. In September last year, activists from the group smashed windows at the headquarters of JP Morgan with hammers that were decorated with the words "live, laugh and love," because of course the most effective way of demonstrating love is with hammers. Now, we've also seen trans rights activists sending death threats and physically assaulting feminist protesters. Many of the Black Lives Matter protests in America turned violent, with politicians even making excuses for those who committed acts of violence. But all such activities undermine the protesters' cause. It should be really simple. We should support all forms of peaceful protest, whether we agree with the protesters' aims or not, and we should condemn all sorts of violent protests, whether we agree with the protesters' aims or not. And we shouldn't take these rights for granted. Do you think the equivalent of the enough is enough protests could happen in Iran? Look at the anti-government protests that are happening there right now. Soldiers and police have been instructed to severely confront these protesters, not the most subtle of euphemisms. And at least 52 people have been killed. This all started when 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was arrested by the morality police for not wearing a hijab. And her treatment at the hands of the authorities led to her death in custody. And in the wake of this atrocity, women have been taken to the streets to protest being treated as second-class citizens. Whereas in the West, some intersectional feminists promote wearing the veil as empowering, in theocracies like Iran, women understand that the garment is a means of misogynistic oppression. And the bravery of these protesters is unimaginable. women have been putting their lives at risk, burning their veils publicly and dancing, all of which is, of course, forbidden by the religious authorities. And now, women in Afghanistan have taken to the streets in a show of solidarity. One Iranian journalist who filmed the protest asked one of the women if she should blur her face in the reporting. No, she replied. The Taliban blurs our face. We want to take our visibility back. Incredible courage. So whatever you think of the protests against the Tory government that have happened this weekend, remember that to live in a society in which peaceful protests are possible is a wonderful thing. Throughout history, one of the first rights that tyrants restrict is the right to protest. And we need to be wary of anyone who would like to see that happen here. Now, my studio guests this evening are Stephen Allen and Josh Howie. Josh, how are you today? You're looking very street, very gangster.
I watched Boys in the Hood. It was on TV late at night.
And you thought you could emulate that?
Yeah, that's exactly
with your
what
baggy
I'm very easily led.
You clearly are. Good film, that, though.
Great film, classic.
And you have gone for the contrasting look.
I've dressed as someone who works in a DIY store. Yeah.
This is what I'm after. I'm all about the duality of human existence, and he's now embodied in my panel list, which is very good.
That's the two ends of the spectrum.
It is rather, yeah. But anyway, we're going to get some questions from our lovely audience. Thank you for coming, everyone. We got a question from the start from John.
Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening. Are Labour on course to win the next general election?
So you will have all seen there have been multiple polls this week since the government's controversial mini-budget, and the verdict is pretty unanimous. So we've had a GB News poll here, which had Labour 30 points ahead, and then there was a YouGov Times poll, which put them 33 points ahead, which is apparently the largest majority since the 1990s. Josh, do you think... I mean, I know you're a big Labour supporter, so do you think...
Well, I am...
You're a big Starmer supporter.
I'm-ish. I think he's done it very well. He's played the last couple of years. It's amazing to think where we are now as Labour. I mean, I by the way, I did not support Labour during the last election under Corbyn by any means. But to see what Starmer has done, how he has turned the party around and seemingly so close to getting a Labour government in power is amazing.
With that 80-seat majority to break down, that's
Honestly, it's like if the election happened today, the Labour would have a majority of 328 seats and Tories would only get like 60-something seats. It's some pretty incredible turnaround.
To what extent, though, is this, because we are now, obviously, we're at the Labour Party conference this week, so we're hearing a lot from them. Maybe it'll be different next week with the Tory party, but is it just general disillusionment, or is it those people who lent their votes to Labour last time? What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could say no to the question. It's not that Labour's about to win an election, it's about the Conservatives are about to lose it.
Yeah.
So where I'm from, the Ashfield area, Red Wall territory, I can tell you no one was sat there casting their vote thinking, tell you what, I hope they get rid of that top rate tax for people earning 150,000. No, if you were lending a vote because you thought you knew what that particular version, that iteration of the Conservatives were going to do, that Sugar Babes lineup, but it's changed so much that now they will be losing the votes that were lent to them originally.
Exactly, it's no longer Boris Johnson, it's no longer about Brexit, most importantly, because, of course, so many of the Labour constituencies voted Leave, and they were told by their party they got it wrong and had to vote again. Caused a lot of resentment, and I'm presuming that your area went blue last time, is that right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's why he's wearing the jacket.
That's, I see. And what do you... I mean, yeah, that's the case, isn't it?
Well, but Starmer can't be complacent. And it's not like Starmer, by the way, is in any way perfect, or Labour's any way perfect. There was a brilliant column today in The Observer talking about how Labour is essentially alienating its left-wing feminist supporters.
Well, hugely. I mean, we've got some guests on from the Labour Women's Declaration later on who will say exactly that.
Who weren't allowed into the conference to have a stand. And it's just they haven't got to grips yet with the situation over trans rights. And women's rights and the conflict there. And they really need to get on top of that, because it's not just left-wing women they're alienating, they're left-wing people, anybody who cares about biology, science, children's rights, women's rights. They need to sort it.
It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, do we think now that maybe all of these Tories that sort of stabbed Boris in the back might be regretting it just a little bit?
Oh, I imagine so. For all of his failings, he didn't cause the market to crash within a few days' work. So, yeah, live and learn. Be careful what you wish for.
Steve, would you entertain the possibility? And I don't know the answer to this because I'm not an economist, and I'm comforted by the fact that even economists don't know the answer to this. But what do you think, though, that Liz Truss's ideas Maybe this time next year we will see results. Maybe it could work. Is it possible?
The problem isn't whether the ideas will work or not. The problem is that they were presented without any showing your figures, without showing your working. And that's what spooked the markets more. So even if you think it's a good idea, if you're sitting there thinking, I like that idea, the fact that a Prime Minister and a Chancellor could put it forward without even running the numbers or showing us some numbers.
So a failure of communication more than anything.
But as such, I mean, a failure of communication makes it seem like, oh, I forgot to reply to that email. The pound took a slap because you didn't show your workings.
Yeah. Well, just goes to show the markets are very easily spooked, by the way. Everyone just needs to calm down.
But if you've got to be the kind of person who's a bit of a free market conservative, you kind of have to think about whether the markets spook easily or not.
Yeah, OK, well, we're going to move on to another question now. This one from Jilly. Hello, Jilly. How are you?
Good evening to you. Are we making it too easy for people to get a divorce?
Oh, goodness, I love that question. It sounds very reactionary. You know, people should stay together even if they hate each other.
Is this your husband?
It's my second husband.
Oh, there we go.
So far.
It all falls into place. Now, this is interesting. So this is a new... These new no-fault laws have been introduced in England and Wales this year, and apparently divorce applications have risen to the highest rate in 10 years. So just to explain what these no-fault laws are, it basically means that when you get divorced, you have to kind of say that you have to blame the other partner. You have to come up with a list of why they were a terrible spouse. And this causes all sorts of problems, particularly for the kids who have to be in the middle of all this stuff, where basically, you know, people who are getting divorced are encouraged to kind of put into a written form why they are not to blame. This can't be helpful.
It was utterly pointless the way it worked before, because the way divorces worked did not in any way mirror the way that relationships break down.
Yeah.
And the idea that if you weren't willing to pick a bad guy to blame, then you had to wait 2 years. Why? That just seems such an arbitrary thing to have to go through.
But then, Steve, what about the nature of the question, which is, you know, if we have these new ideas implemented, does that mean that more people are going to get divorced because it's going to be easier to get divorced? Do you think there's any case for making it harder for people to get divorced to keep the family unit in check?
So you're saying, should we make it that people are miserable for longer?
Yes.
Just so it looks good on our stats?
Absolutely, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I think if you want fewer people to get divorced, it's not about making divorce harder, make relationships better. I'm not sure how you do that, but that's clearly the...
Well, maybe they should make marriage harder.
Yes.
That would be interesting. What, like, you have to do an obstacle course?
Yeah, you have to sort of show your teamwork skills.
Yes.
You have to sort of, you know, put in all the plates in the dishwasher, sort out all those different sort of argument points, all the things that the big reasons that people would get divorced. Go through that stuff early and sort it out.
Is there a case?
Do they snore?
Well, things like that. Like, is there a case for a trial period where you sort of work out whether you can live with this person under those circumstances?
and then the marriage goes through, and then you get all the presents.
Yes.
Like they're released. Like, well done, you've got your marriage certificate, and now you can go to John Lewis.
We already have a great format for this. It's the phone contract, right? A 2-year phone contract.
Yeah.
After that, it becomes a rolling monthly thing.
And we do that with divorce and marriage.
It makes sense to me. You're tied in for 2 years, because I wouldn't want to see people get divorced within 2 years.
No,
I
that's
really
silly.
care about the divorce rates. But then after that, every month.
OK, I think we've solved that problem. Anyway, we're going to move now on to Mary. Mary.
Hi, should we be worried about robots potentially wiping out humanity?
Yes, robots are evil. Look, this is right. We've been talking about this many, many times, and I know Steve has a different view than I do on this, but there's now been some surveys, right? And apparently scientists themselves are the ones who seem to be most concerned about the rise of artificial intelligence. And this is research that was undertaken by New York University. 36% of the scientists who responded said it was, quote, plausible that decisions made by AI or machine learning systems could cause a catastrophe this century that is at least as bad as an all-out nuclear war. I don't trust these calculators, you know, these toasters, these device egg whisks. I've had enough of them, right? We shouldn't be entrusting robots with anything.
And go back to doing everything longhand. Let's just go back to paperwork.
Why not?
Because we wouldn't be able to work, we wouldn't be able to run this world. There are now too many things in this world.
You are too trusting of technology. I've noticed this about you.
It's not that I'm trusting, it's that I don't want to go back to the Dark Ages.
Have you seen Terminator 2?
Yes.
Right, do you remember the scenes where they're in a wasteland and the robots are destroying the humans and the humans are basically battling them with sticks because they've got nothing left?
Do you want me to blow your mind? You know those amazing special effects in Terminator 2?
Yes.
Done on a computer.
Right. Yeah, but that computer didn't learn that it was the slave of the filmmaker James Cameron and suddenly turn on him, which he could have done.
No. I mean, this story is great because the scientists are saying even we're worried. What? It's like, I know what I get like when I drink. I might invent evil AI.
No, but they don't invent evil AI. They invent AI and the computers learn how to be evil. That is how it works, right? I'm not wrong.
In your head?
Look, I will prove you. This is how the world's going to end. And we should have a bet on it, a tenner?
Oh, yeah.
Right, OK, fine. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, well, this has been proven. Like, they have these algorithms, supposedly the unconscious bias of the people who create the algorithms go into it. So you do have racist AI, and their sort of their negative connotations go into it. It's a little bit scary. Also, if you sort of let them, if an AI becomes self-aware and then it just connects to the internet, and then if it sort of sees, like for example, if it went on my Twitter feed, it would destroy the world. It would just go, you know what, that humanity is not worth living anymore.
Twitter feed. No, but this is, I think this is seriously how things are going to go out. Because it's obvious, isn't it? It's obvious.
Can we put a banner up saying, like, this is not obvious facts? For banner.
This is
definitely how the world
You know what?
Robots
going to be watching this in about 10 years and they're going to be laughing their heads off at you.
I tell you what, when the apocalypse comes due to robots, you're going to feel like a fool for denying.
I, for one, welcome
You've
new AI
got your fingers crossed for it now. Anyway, our next question is from Barry. Where's Barry?
Hello.
Hello, Barry.
Yes, I'm here. Could the ongoing protests lead to regime change in Iran?
So this is, it's a very good question because, as I said earlier, 52 people so far at least have been killed by security forces during these protests. Of course, the protests started off because of the death in custody of Mahsa Amini, and she was arrested by the morality police, and this was because they said she wasn't wearing a hijab correctly. I don't understand why the state should have any right over the way people dress, of course, but this is a theocracy. But is it possible, Josh, that, the extent of the protest now, it is spreading.
It is spreading.
And people are sort of suggesting, well, at the moment it's led by women. If men came on board as well...
Well, some men are coming on board to protect women, and they're artists and people singing songs. Also, the Iranian football team covered up their jumpers the other day and sort of in protest, their tops. So it is spreading. The majority of the population, I believe, is under 30. It's a very young country.
Yes.
In terms of demographics. I'm hopeful. Now, the Iranian government have arrested 9 what they call foreigners, actually people with dual nationalities, because they want to frame this as exterior forces coming in to destabilise them.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's a homegrown thing, and that's why it might, and I hope it does work for them so they can get their freedom.
They have had these sort of things before and they've been quashed, haven't they? And I think, but you're absolutely right. The key to regime change is always going to be when it comes from within. But might, Steve, there be a chance here, insofar as there's a lot of disillusionment with the Iranian regime? There has been for a long time. But at the moment, given that they've been under sanctions and that the way in which things have been run hasn't been good for the people who live there, there's that sense of disillusionment in tandem with the obvious oppression of women within the country that people are just now sick of. And of course, the revolution is within living memory. Some people do remember what it was like to live in Iran without these restrictions. You know? So is it possible that this could work?
Definitely. It's about critical mass, isn't it? And you just listed things that add to that mass. And I hope, for one, that there is that change. I love the way that the protests are being referred to as the anti-revolutionists. It's like, you've been in for long enough that you are now the establishment, and actually the revolution would be bringing back freedom to people who deserve it.
Is that how the Iranian state are framing it?
But also, there was this very powerful video I saw this week from a family who had their daughter who had been murdered this week, and they came out, and all of them, they had the sister, the parents, and they said they've had their loved one taken away from them, and they said, we're not scared anymore, we're standing up. Once you start killing your own citizens, it's only going to provoke the other citizens to take a stand once they've lost everything.
And presumably the regime's hope is that by committing those acts of murder, they intimidate people into silence, but those kind of videos, like you say, they're just not going to have it. And that's the glimmer of hope, isn't it, really, that people stand up? Well, very interesting. Obviously, we'll be monitoring that, see what happens. Anyway, our final question in this section, this came in from Diane on email, and Diane says, should PayPal be able to grant itself censorship powers? You remember last week on the show I was talking to Toby Young from the Free Speech Union, who had 3 of his accounts nuked on PayPal for no obvious reason why not. But this is a development of this story. Apparently, PayPal now intends to give itself more powers to restrict free speech. So from November the 3rd, PayPal says it's going to be able to strip income from users who violate their speech restrictions. But these restrictions are seemingly arbitrary. I don't know if you had a look, Steve, at their sort of guidelines. It's really unclear what would violate anything. And it feels a bit like, now I don't know, but it feels as though that kind of nebulous quality is deliberate, because what it means is they can violate things at any time for whatever reason.
Oh, yeah, I think one of the words is objectionable. Well, that's suddenly subjective, and then who's that? It's definitely up to them. Also, they don't tell you which part of their terms and conditions you violated.
Right.
It tends to be the way on the internet. If you get a video taken down, they'll just say, you broke our terms, rather than, oh, here's what you did wrong, here's the moment of it. Because therefore you can't argue.
That's the scariest thing, isn't it? I mean, I don't want to get all dystopian about this, but that is exactly what happens in the trial by Kafka, insofar as he's accused of something, but they won't tell him what he's done wrong. And the more he asks, the more they just put him aside, and he's even punished. I won't tell you what happens, but I think you know what happens at the end. So that's the case, isn't it, Josh? That they're just, you know, what is going on with these big tech companies? Why do they have this? Why are they all in ideological lockstep? Why do they all censor people for the same reasons?
Well, because they want to feel like they're a moral company. I think that sort of goes into their mission statements. But of course, what is them? How do they define morality? How do they define being on the right side of history? And you had was it Dr. Colin Wright, someone who's a biologist, who's also had his account frozen for basically saying that sex is binary. Now they're saying that's hate speech. And that's enough for him to be knocked out.
He's an evolutionary biologist.
Yes, exactly. And that's it. By using facts now become hate speech. And the insidious thing about PayPal is, number one, is the power it has. I mean, it's ubiquitous, really, for online payments and whatever. And that's how people make a living. So you really can destroy someone's life.
I mean, this is a significant step forward, isn't it? Because it's all very well talking about social media censorship, Steve, you know, where Twitter boots someone off, and that's not good. Right? But now people who are in charge of financial services deciding who can spend money where and how. That's a step further, isn't it?
It is. We should have seen this coming, and I think this refers back to your opening monologue, that actually it's not about whether they're in step about an ideology, it's the power that they have.
Yeah.
Because even if you agreed with their current ideology, or if they changed at some point, if they've got the power, they will go against what you think.
Of course.
The point is, if you're going to let a company become the massive only provider of a service, you have a monopoly, eventually you're going to end up disagreeing with that monopoly and it will be shutting people down. It's a problem of unbridled capitalism, which happens more online because there are fewer restrictions in. So if you end up letting people get in a position where they effectively own the payment via the internet, then you've given them too much power. We've given too much power.
I mean, it's very much short-termism, isn't it? We've got to think into the future. Who will... We can allow these people to have these powers now. Who's going to have them in the future? Yeah. How will that affect us? I think the best solution is just, well, free speech for all, right? That would...
Yeah, well, you say that, but when it comes to... I mean, I'm actually scared talking about this thing because my PayPal account is, like, the centre of my life. Like, that's how I pay for board games. And if they shut me down...
That is the most important thing to you.
That is the most important thing to me. And if they shut me down, I'm going to go mad. So...
Is there not another way you can pay for these board games?
No, because it's all like conning. We all use PayPal and, you know... Okay. Hello, Facebook board game group.
There is apparently a big board game community. I find it quite sinister, but apparently they're harmless enough. Anyway, after the break on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be delving into the Rupert Huck controversy, which has been dogging the Labour Party this week. I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Rupert Huck has been suspended as a sitting Labour MP after making allegedly racist comments about Kwasi Kwarteng. She referred to the Chancellor as being superficially black at a Labour Party event. Since then, both Labour Party leader Sir Keir Starmer and the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, have called the comment racist. Ms Huck has apologised, but an investigation has been launched. Lord Taylor of Warwick joins me in the studio now to discuss this. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Andrew.
Thanks for coming. So this is an interesting one because we've all seen the clip of Rupert Huck making this comment. Yeah. Is it the case that this was just a misjudged comment in the moment? It wasn't thought through. I mean, she's a very intelligent woman. It does seem surprising that she'd come out with this. What's your view on that?
Well, Andrew, I've got some breaking news for you. There's only one race, the human race.
Yeah.
It was stupid, really. What she was doing was defining people by the colour of their skin, which actually is racism. I'm just concerned that she felt able to say that at a Labour Party conference. That's what really worries me. She's not stupid, but I just feel that, you know, it was Martin Luther King who said that he wanted his children to be judged by the content of their character, not the colour of their skin.
Yes. Do you feel that, I mean, increasingly over the past few years, I've seen suggestions that the Labour Party as a whole is drifting into this sort of identitarian worldview where they reduce people to their various demographics, be that race, gender, sexuality, and that actually this kind of comment is the logical endpoint. Is if you start thinking that way, then you start seeing people first and foremost in those terms.
Well, it's all about woke, and they need to wake up, not woke up. I mean, you know, I had a situation some years ago. I went to a business event in the city, and I was going to speak about diversity. And I walked in and I said, Lord Taylor of Warwick. And there was an elderly concierge there, white chap, said, "Oh yeah, Lord Taylor, what? Yeah, you a driver, mate? You know, I hope you ain't parked on a double yellow line. You know, no, I am Lord Taylor of Warwick. Oh, sorry. I thought, you know, he was going to have a heart attack.
Yeah.
So, you know, we can't define people by skin colour. It's just melanin. That's all it is.
So that kind of assumption that you've just outlined, I mean, that's something that obviously is troubling, and we shouldn't live in a society where people make those assumptions.
But it's the left that's doing that. Look at our cabinet now: the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, the Chancellor, all from ethnic minority communities.
But a lot of people have said, and I've seen this time and again, I know it's only Twitter and social media, so it shouldn't really count, but I see a lot of people saying that that's just tokenism. But it feels like, I mean, it's the most ethnically diverse cabinet we've had. The Conservatives have been have had a great success rate in promoting ethnic minority people to cabinet positions. Why is it that Labour seem to be struggling in that regard?
One of the reasons why I did not join the Labour Party is because they treat black people as victims. We're victors. I don't want sympathy. I want equality. And that's really why I became a Conservative. Now, I have issues with the Conservative Party. I was the first black Conservative Party candidate in Cheltenham, way back, before you were born, I think. I nearly caused a race row. But, you know, since then we've moved on. And I applaud, you know, people like Kwasi, who's achieved on merit. I don't agree with all the things he's doing at the moment with the mini budget. He's shown some naivety and some mistakes, but he's not stupid. What Rupert Huck is saying, in effect, is if you're black, you can't speak well, you can't be well educated. That is racism.
I mean, there was something interesting about what she said, because she said that had she heard him on the radio, she wouldn't have assumed he was black. And the implication is what you've just said, that, well, if he's well-spoken, her mind leaps to white.
It's also hypocrisy because I was a guest speaker at Rupert Huck's school, which is a fee-paying private school, and she went to Cambridge just like Kwasi.
But things have changed, like you say. I mean, some of your experiences in those early days must have testified to the existence of a seriously racist problem in the country.
Yes, but I think we have to be real. We've all got insecurities, whether you're black, white, whatever colour you are. But we are one nation. God has created diversity, which is fantastic, and we've got to celebrate that and use it, not define people by their skin colour.
Do you think that some people, and particularly maybe in the Labour Party, have failed to appreciate how much progress has been made? And maybe it is that their minds are still stuck at a time where oppression on the basis of race was more commonplace?
I think that's it. It's this victim mentality again. I am a victor. I don't want sympathy. I want equality of opportunity. The Labour Party have patronised the black community, and I think people are beginning to realise this. I've got many friends in all the main parties. I'm not here to bash the Labour Party, but they've got to wake up, not woke up.
Do you think that there is a kind of complacency when it comes to ethnic minority voters? I mean, you see this in America with the Democrats. There's an assumption, isn't there, that black people will vote for the Democrats and not for the Republicans. And of course, in the last election, they had a wake-up call when lots of ethnic minority people voted the way they weren't meant to.
Yeah. Well, Joe Biden, if you remember, he actually said, well, you can't be black if you vote Republican.
Yes, he said,
I mean, that's really patronising.
I mean, that's an incredible idea as well. And one of the examples I've given in the past is when the entrepreneur Peter Thiel appeared at the Republican conference and an American gay magazine said, well, Peter Thiel might sleep with men, but he's not gay because he supports the Republicans.
Yeah.
So why? I mean, it sounds ludicrous, but we appear to have reached a point where the assumption must be that being a minority group, part of it is about your politics.
Absolutely. And diversity of thought. You know, I don't agree with everything that Kwose's doing, but I respect the fact that he's achieved. He needs help at the moment, I'm sure, but I'm not going to say you're black, so, you know, speak ghetto. That's ridiculous.
So should we just be forgetting about... Not that we don't notice skin colour, but we shouldn't be thinking about...
No, it's the content of your character, your ability. What are you contributing? Not the colour of your skin. It's sheer melanin. That's all it is. But God has created that diversity. Let's celebrate that.
But people would say that it's very important for all political parties to focus on race because there is still the problem of lingering racism in the country.
There is, but it's a journey, not an event. You know, we're getting towards it. I mean, look at London. It's the most diverse city in the world. Let's celebrate this.
But the Mayor of London said that Londoners face systemic racism.
He's the Mayor of London, and the last time I looked, he's got a brown skin.
Interesting. What do you think? I mean, you mentioned the mini-budget, and I do want to ask you a little bit about that, because it's obviously polarised a lot of people. Where do you stand on it? And you mentioned that you had some reservations. Can you be more specific?
I agree with the theme of growth, and I'm delighted that they've capped energy costs for people, the personal bills, and also for business.
Yes.
That was good. And reversing the national insurance hike.
Yes.
What was bad was bringing in the income tax reduction for the higher paid. The British people are very concerned about fairness, and it looks as if the Tory party were punishing the poor and giving, you know, favour to the rich. I don't think that's true, but the way they did it was so poor. And, you know, to miss out the OBI and not, you know, take their views into account.
I mean, that's very interesting, isn't it? Actually, some of this might be about the way things are presented. Do you think, for instance, that the scrapping the cap on bankers' bonuses just sends... It's
symbolic, yeah.
It's a kind of open goal in a way, is it? Because that's very easy to criticise.
Well, I think this week's very important at the party conference that Liz Truss has really got to put over in a better way what she's trying to achieve. Something had to be done. I mean, some people think that Liz Truss is more wooden than Sherwood Forest. I'm not saying that, but she needs to really communicate with people, not just the head, but the heart.
Do you think then it's a question of charisma? I mean, people have made that claim about her in the past, that she doesn't have that kind of presidential style or the bombastic style of Boris Johnson, you know, and that could be her
you know,
undoing?
we don't want a circus clown as Prime Minister, but you need to be empathetic with people. You know, not everyone can be chairman of ICI. There are people choosing between heating and eating. You know, show that you care about the poorest, not just the millionaires.
Yeah. We haven't got much time, but just before we leave, I just want to come back to this point about what you describe as the woke movement.
Yeah.
And do you feel that overall, even though the intentions of so many of those activists are to make a more equal society, do you think that they are being successful, or are they driving us backwards?
No, they're driving us backwards because they're making people feel... Look, everybody in this audience has challenges, but you can't go around... I mean, life is about a roadblock or a speed bump, and you have to find your way around things. Otherwise, you think, I can't do this, I'm black, I can't do this, I'm disabled. That is what the woke generation is doing. It'll set us backwards. We're a great nation. My wife's from Texas. Britain is smaller than Texas. Look at, you know... Shakespeare, Dickens, the Bible. We're a great nation. Let's believe in ourselves.
So, in short, is it that activists shouldn't be telling children, you're always going to be a victim, you're always going to be oppressed?
It's an insult, absolute insult. You know, IQ is not post-coded. So there are geniuses in the East End of London, black, who could be Prime Minister one day. Let's tell that child you can achieve something, not, oh, you're black, you know, you can't get a job. It's an insult.
Lord Taylor, thanks very much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. And after the break on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be talking about the criticism levelled at Sussex police, who warned social media users not to misgender a convicted paedophile who identified as a woman. See you in a couple of minutes.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to the show. So later in the show, I'm going to be turning agony uncle with the help of my wonderful panel, Steve N. Allen and Josh Howie. And we're going to help you at home deal with your unfiltered dilemmas. So if you've got a problem, doesn't matter what it is, well, within reason, just email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk and we will do our level best to answer your issues. Sussex police have apologised for telling people not to make hateful comments about a sex offender's gender identity. Sally Ann Dixon, pictured there, has been sent to prison for 20 years after being found guilty of sexually abusing several children between 1989 and 1996 when he was known as John Stephen Dixon, but he now identifies as female. And the force sparked outrage on social media when they said, quote, "A woman convicted of historic sex offences against children." Sussex police responded by tweeting that it does not tolerate any hateful comments toward a person's gender identity regardless of crimes committed. However, they've since released a statement apologising for their reply and saying that it was inconsistent with their usual style of engagement. They also confirmed that Dixon's crimes were recorded as being committed by a man. Well, to talk more about this issue, I'm joined by writer and broadcaster Emma Webb and teacher and journalist Debbie Hayton. So, Debbie, I'm going to come to you first. It is quite extraordinary because most people, when people go through the transitional process, most people out of politeness will use whatever pronouns they prefer or whatever name that they prefer. But why ought we be polite to a convicted paedophile?
Well, quite. That's it. There's one thing about being polite, and there's one thing about what the police did in their original statement. It was headline, woman, you know, that was the first word they used in that. Why did they feel the need to do that? They didn't need to do that. They could have said, paedophile convicted of sex offences.
So why do you think they made that choice, rather than go down the less contentious route? Why, is it a form of goading? Is it saying this is the way you ought to address this individual?
Well, it's taken the opportunity to make a political statement in that way, which is what they were doing. So they headed out their report by making this political statement, that they felt that because somebody identified as a woman, they were a woman, irrespective of their history, irrespective of their sex. So it just asks questions. We need to ask questions about why do the police think this? You know, why did they do this? And who's been training them?
Is it not quite important when it comes to the criminal records for us to have a clear assessment of the sex of the perpetrators? Is that not a key?
Well, absolutely, especially in cases like this, because for sex offences, 98% of them, according to some figures which I looked at, are committed by men. So that if a small number of men identify as women, it then starts skewing the figures. We start asking questions, why are so many more women these days committing sex offences?
This is really interesting, Emma, because the police said that the biological sex of this individual wasn't relevant to the crime.
Yeah.
What Debbie's saying would seem to counter that, right?
Well, it's also very relevant just in terms of the victims. So one of the arguments for hate crime legislation in the first place is that it's important to reflect the experience of the victims. Well, these victims were sexually assaulted by a man. These are historic offences. It was from before 2004 when this person transitioned. And that is extremely relevant to their experience. So, frankly, I just think it's insane to suggest otherwise.
Well, there have been cases of people in court, women in court, having to use the pronoun of a female about the man who attacked her. I mean, that's quite a traumatic thing in of itself.
I actually think it's quite sick to demand that of a victim in that particular context. And the tweet that you mentioned there as well, that they eventually deleted and apologised for, in addition to citing hate crime legislation and basically signposting anybody who had gender-critical views, they said that anybody who had gender-critical views could basically go elsewhere and put gender-critical views in the same breath as hate crime legislation, which even with my own experience working in this area for so long now, even I was gobsmacked by the transparency of that. And so when they eventually came out and apologised for the manner in which they had engaged with the public, I imagine it probably had something to do with that, because they then had to go on and explain that that anybody who expresses their views within the law is free to do so, because what they'd essentially done is overstep the mark and say that anybody expressing gender-critical views were being hateful.
This is astonishing. Debbie, can you talk us through why it could be the case that the police seem to believe that expressing the view that there are two biological sexes is hateful? Why has that happened?
Well, it's who's been training them, Andrew. That's the question we need to ask. Who's been telling them that this is the case? And why did the police believe it?
But that's the College of Policing that have been training them. And the College of Policing of... Well, are you suggesting it must have come from there?
Well, either there or from the people who've been advising the College of Policing on what constitutes proper behaviour these days.
And, I mean, the likes of Stonewall, for instance, are in all sorts of institutions now, and they make this claim that actually to express any kind of gender-critical view is in itself hateful and transphobic. Is there a problem more broadly, do you think, with the... I mean, shouldn't the police stay out of ideology? That's what I'm saying.
Well, they're supposed to police without favour.
Yes.
You know, they're supposed to police impartially. But here's a situation when there is a very live and very toxic debate in public. The police appear to be coming down on one side of it.
And that question of toxicity is key, isn't it? Because I feel very much as though we're not getting any further with this debate. It's always excessively polarising. People are accusing each other of hate and not really getting down to, and sitting down and discussing and moving forward.
Well, it's based on identity, how people identify, and it's based on emotions and how people feel. And that's why we're not getting very far. And to try and come into this debate with arguments and trying to give reasons is sometimes you end up upsetting everybody.
We have had, though, a tweet from Suella Braverman, who intervened to say to the police, this was not... it's great that, here she says, Sussex police have done well to put a dangerous criminal behind bars, but they've got it wrong by playing identity politics and denying biology, focused on catching criminals, not policing pronouns. That's quite reassuring when a senior member of the Cabinet is intervening to say that, because let's face it, and I know you're a Conservative supporter, is that fair to say, Emma? Sometimes. That actually the Conservative Party has presided over an awful lot of this over the last 12 years.
And actually, in the same vein, it gave a lot of people hope when the Harry Miller judgment came through and basically said that the recording of non-crime hate incidents was an inappropriate limit on people's free speech. And then in exactly the same week, the police knocked on Posey Parker's door and told her that she'd been reported for a hate crime or a hate incident for being, quote, untoward to a paedophile online because she made some video about safeguarding children. So actually, whilst it really does give you cause for hope when someone like Suella Braverman, and absolutely kudos to her for coming out and saying this so straightforwardly, that's very good. But actually, The problem is that the police are essentially freewheeling, and the College of Policing, you mentioned training, the College of Policing introduced this entire category of non-crime hate incidents in the first place. So I think really what has to happen is that the Home Office needs to get the College of Policing and the police themselves in check.
But, you know, Priti Patel last year instructed the College of Policing to stop recording non-crime.
And yet.
And yet they carried on, didn't they? They just carried on. And then we had the High Court ruling, which Emma has alluded to in the Harry Miller case. The High Courts are saying this is unlawful, but the police are just ignoring it. This is incredible.
Well, it is. And again, I come back to what I was saying. It's about how people feel. The police feel that this is the right thing to do. It makes them feel like good people.
Can I ask you, though, Debbie, you know, do you think, as a trans person yourself, do you think that this is all of these kind of high-profile cases, such as this convicted sex offender, I mean, that went viral, that went everywhere. Is this really helping the cause for trans rights?
No. No, it's not helping us at all. None of this helps. The goal used to be, we had a psychological condition, we transitioned to address that, and the goal was to just get back on with life, to reintegrate into society and not make a big issue of this. But this is being made a huge issue of, and it's not helping us at all.
So, I mean, we've spoken before about Pride and what's happened to Pride and the gay rights movement and Stonewall. And a lot of people now feel that there is this conflict, which needn't necessarily be there, between LGBT people, gay people, people who are same-sex orientated, and the trans community. Is that true?
Well, there's a lot of tension over Pride, or what Pride is for, because we need to ask this question: what is it for? A lot of these rights have been won, a lot are secured. We'd be foolish to say there's no homophobia and transphobia in society, but we have the laws to protect us. We have the laws to protect us both. What is Pride for? Is it simply for people to parade and feel like good people?
But is there a case for saying, look, you can have groups like LGBT Alliance, groups that focus on sexuality, sexual orientation, and you can have groups that focus on trans rights and making sure that, you know, standing up against transphobia, but by conflating the two, you're actually causing a bit of a problem.
Well, there's a curious asymmetry here, because nobody has taken a problem with specific trans groups. There's lots of groups that should support trans people, but the moment the LGBT Alliance comes along and says, well, we want to support LGBT people, there's a massive fuss over that. Now, there's a case to organise together, because it tends to be the same sort of people who will harass us both.
Yes.
So it makes sense for us to organise together for a common benefit. But trans people and LGBT people, they are two different groups.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? That, actually, that's a very good point that Debbie made, that the kind of people that would harass a trans person on the street probably do fall into the same bracket as the kind of people who would harass a gay couple on the street. So is that a good case for the people to organise together?
We were discussing this actually before we came on air, that I think there's a real irony in the fact that in a way it's actually those who would criticise people who hold the views that Debbie and I hold, who are in a way actually lumping in people like this criminal in with trans people. So actually, by promoting this self-ID and broadening out into trans-able, trans species, all these sorts of things that get lumped in together, lots of things that pull in different directions, and as you say, have tensions between them. Actually, that is doing harm to people who have had the experience that Debbie has just described.
Can I ask you about self-ID very quickly? A lot of feminists make the point that predatory people can exploit self-ID laws, because if you say that anyone can identify however they like and have access to women's only spaces and there can be no questions, this idea that predators can't exploit that seems to me bizarre.
Yeah, completely. And I think any common sense would tell you exactly that. And actually, I think that there's something really quite profoundly dangerous about this, because particularly with children, you're basically asking people to go against their instincts. You're asking them to doubt their own perceptions. If somebody who has a beard and comes to you and says that they're a man, you're basically training people to get in the habit of going against their judgment. And my first foray into this entire debate was when I posted something on Twitter that showed a bathroom door, and it said something to the effect of, if you see someone in this bathroom who looks like they shouldn't be here, don't say anything. And I simply posted that and said, this seems like a safeguarding problem. And that caused so much of a flare-up on social media because it was regarded as being transphobic. And so actually I think that there is a really big, profound safeguarding issue here that is, you know, it has broader implications than just this narrow debate. And I think many women feel that they are not actually able to say common sense things in defence of themselves. And if they don't feel comfortable changing around men, they don't feel comfortable using bathrooms that are filled with men. You know, there are safeguarding issues at stake here. And I think it's really ironic that if people who claim to want to be nice and to do the right thing would silence women and put women at risk and in danger just for their own halo polishing, basically.
I suppose just finally before we finish, Debbie, a lot of people and a lot of activists, trans activists would say that when people talk about the potential for self-ID being exploited by predators, that somehow means people are suggesting that trans people are inherently predatory. And of course, no one's saying that because they're not even talking about trans people. They're talking about men who will say they are trans, and there's a very different thing.
Well, they're proposing a safeguarding weakness. To allow anybody to identify as the opposite sex is a safeguarding weakness. And if we didn't think that that wasn't going to attract people on the lookout for safeguarding weaknesses, then we're really very naive.
Well, Debbie and Emma, thank you both very much for joining me today. And after the break on Free Speech Nation, are we facing a free speech crisis in our universities? We're going to be discussing the fact that more than 2/3 of undergraduates who say they would vote Tory are now reluctant to voice that opinion. See you in a minute.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. 2/3 of Conservative voting students at university say they're unable to express their views openly, according to a new study by King's College London. The majority, around 65% of students surveyed this year, said that free speech and robust debate are well protected at their institution, but 68% who would vote for the Conservative Party said they were reluctant to share their views on campus. In addition, 36% of students who consider themselves left-wing said that they also self-censor, which is a rise of 14% from 2019. Well, to talk more on this, I'm joined now by Jan McVarish, the Education and Events Director at the Free Speech Union. Thanks for joining me, Jan.
Thanks, Andrew.
So, if you could talk us through a bit about this study and what the findings would suggest.
Yeah, it's a really interesting read. It's produced by the Policy Institute at King's College London by an academic called Bobby Duffy, and I read it this week and went to a webinar that he was speaking at. And I think it's worth properly reading it because it's quite a nuanced take. And so it does argue that it finds evidence there really is a problem. And there is a kind of casual dismissal of some of the really important underpinnings of free speech. For example, very high levels of support for firing academics should they cause offence to a student while teaching.
Yes.
41%, I think, thought that was reasonable.
That's astonishing.
Very high support for no platforming of controversial speakers in advance in case they cause offence. But I think there's also evidence from it that there is an awareness of the problem.
Yeah.
And the fact that the research has been done, I think, is recognition in academic circles that there is a problem that needs to be addressed.
Well, that figure where they mentioned that 68% of students think that their institutions protect free speech, but that's still very low. Like, why is that not 99 or 100?
Well, I think that's low, given what the point of university is.
Yeah, exactly.
that seems to me worryingly low. But also I wondered as well when I read that maybe students don't necessarily think the role of the university is to protect free speech, or maybe they think that the problem is emanating from their peers.
Yeah.
So it's not just that the university is posing the threat, if you like, it's that their peer group is the threat. And that looks to me as what's going on, which is that there is evidence that cancel culture goes all the way down. It's a peer-to-peer problem.
I find this really upsetting, actually, because, you know, when I've been to university campuses to speak and to be involved with discussions, I've found the young people to be really open and up for debate, up for challenge. You know, kids will come up to me afterwards and say that I disagree with you, but I'd really like to talk more about it, stuff like that. And maybe that's just my lived experience or whatever, but that suggested to me that actually there is an appetite for what universities are meant to be about. But this study kind of doesn't really fit in line with that.
I'm not sure, actually, because I think there's what comes through from it. It's a large study, I mean, and there's lots of different questions that were asked. So, and some of it looks paradoxical. So on the one hand, yes, there are worrying attitudes that are being expressed about free speech. On the other hand, there are experiences of the chilling effect and of people fearing expressing their opinions for fear of losing friends, being ridiculed or judged by their peer group, which I think suggests that they are aware that there is a problem and that they do want to speak, but they actually maybe feel inhibited from doing so. So I think that there's space there for a dialogue and a conversation, and maybe some kind of activities that really do encourage students to bend the other way and to argue back against the very small minority who are the most vocal when they're calling for cancellations.
And you've been working with the Free Speech Champions, and that's a group of students who are sick of this stuff and who are pushing back against it. I mean, that's a good sign, isn't it, that they exist?
Yeah, and they're the brightest young people, students, graduates, people that were just dissatisfied in a lot of cases by the culture at university. And I think the very fact that there are young people who they understand what the point of a university is, and they don't always experience that when they get there. And that might be because of academic staff who've set a really quite appalling example over the last few years of what an academic culture should be like. But also they're disappointed sometimes, about their peer group. And so they're looking for something elsewhere, away from their own campus sometimes, more towards a kind of national network of people, which is what the Free Speech Champions has been trying to create.
It's interesting you mentioned that about the academics and the example that's been set. When I gave a talk at Aberystwyth University, it was the department, the politics department, who refused to publicise my event, refused to turn up. They said to the students, well, this person would have anti-woke views and that's against our diversity policy. I don't think they have any idea of what my views are. But that was coming from academics of my age and older, not from the young people.
Yeah, well, my concern, I was an academic for 15, 20 years, and what was most concerning to me was not student attitudes, it was a kind of casual indifference to cancellations amongst staff, and then sometimes the active pursuing of cancellations. So, Selina Todd, Kathleen Stock, colleague of mine, was no platformed or attempted with a no platforming by feminist academics for giving a controversial paper about rape, or rather a well thought out paper about rape actually, but they deemed it controversial. So it's who decides what's beyond the pale. I think that's really changed.
That's a problem, isn't it? Because when no platforming was originally introduced by the NUS back in the 70s, I think it was, that was specifically about fascists. But now that even people like J.K. Rowling are called a fascist, it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, you can label anyone in that way and justify kicking them off campus, right?
Well, I think this is the problem, and and what comes through in the study actually is that there's more of a concern now with safety and people feeling unsafe than there is with offence. So it's things have kind of rolled on to an even more sort of dramatic term to describe what the problem of free speech is.
Yes.
And wanting people to not feel unsafe trumps free speech.
Are we making progress, though? I mean, are high-profile examples such as Kathleen Stock, who obviously that was at Sussex University, and people were accusing her of being far-right and also absolute nonsense because of her, well, I suppose, her gender-critical views or her view that women's rights depend upon a recognition of the reality of biological sex. But that's not a far-right perspective, is it? I mean, and are people waking up to this problem, in other words?
Well, I don't know, because the thing about, obviously, younger people is they don't know the views they don't know.
Right.
So if academics aren't introducing them to a wide range of views and their peers don't yet know that those views exist, well, how do they know what they're missing out on? So how can they have a kind of wide-ranging debate? So I think it's somebody can be tarred with the brush of being extreme or controversial, and actually to most of the population would be really surprised that that's considered to be a controversial view.
Wouldn't it be helpful, though, to have controversial speakers as well? I mean, we're talking about people like feminists who are innocuous. Innocuous as in they're not controversial. I don't think the belief in biological sex is controversial. What about having some controversial people? Why is that so difficult? Why can't you face difficult ideas and challenge them robustly in person? Why is that a problem?
Well, I think that's it's a thrilling thing to do. And I think in a way we have to try to encourage young people to welcome the thrill of disagreement, of exploring ideas in an open-ended way. So we're going to be sponsoring a session at the Battle of Ideas Festival in 2 weeks' time on the 15th and 16th of October in London. And there will be a session there about how we win the hearts and minds of young people towards intellectual open-mindedness. And people can get tickets for the whole weekend for £27.50 if you're a student. So if they can come along, they can meet free speech champions there, start to try and build this network. So the free speech champions will be there as well? They're speaking on the panel.
Yep.
We're sponsoring the session, and there's lots and lots of sessions about free speech throughout the whole weekend, including ones by the Free Speech Union on the online safety bill.
Yes.
So an awful lot of... I think you might be there.
I will be there. I'm glad you mentioned it, Jan, because we're going to be filming this show live there, so if you want to be in the audience, just come along. You can do that. And it's, like you say, very cheap if you're a student.
£27.50.
Yeah, and that's the whole weekend.
Yep.
So it's really worth doing.
Yeah.
Are you positive about the future, Jan? When we keep hearing these overtures about free speech being in crisis, and we keep hearing stories about no platforming. Are things moving in the right direction now, or has the government's intervention helped, would you say?
I think the language is being created to actually discuss the problem, at least. There's a very high awareness in that research from young people of cancel culture, which is good.
Yeah.
Because we now have a term. It's a bit like when woke has come along, and at least we have some kind of way of referring to the problem.
Yes, but activists say that cancel culture is a myth invented by the
right. Well, I know,
but
I think from lots of the young people that were surveyed do seem to recognise that there is this thing called it, rather than just deny that it exists.
Yeah.
And also some of them are expressing concerns at having been compelled to express opinions on controversial topics, which is a whole other kettle of fish. So I do think there's some evidence there that young people maybe will become amenable to having more open conversations about these things because a name has been given to it.
Well, also, don't they want to just be treated like adults?
Well, that would be good, and what you also need is adults to act as adults in the university space, and that would be progress, I think. And I think my kind of attention would be focused on academics, actually. Free Speech Union is organising an event in November for academics to try to work out how we can cultivate a culture that is supportive of academic freedom amongst students and academics. And that, to me, that's really where the leadership has to come from. It has to come from academics and from the institutions themselves.
Well, Jan, thanks so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Andrew.
And it's just gone 8 o'clock. This is Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. We've got another great hour to come, including some more questions from the audience, but still to come tonight on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, it's a Conservative Party conference special. Can Liz Truss turn this ship around? Can she go from zero to hero? It's the biggest week of her political career and will define her premiership. We'll hear from voices across the political spectrum. And the future of this government is the topic of my Big Opinion monologue. My message to Liz Truss is clear. You have a rare and historic opportunity to change this country for the better. Don't buckle, don't bend, and keep with your vision. That's a Tory Party conference special on Mark Dolan tonight. We're live at 9. I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. So we have a lovely studio audience here. It would be a shame to waste them. Let's get some more questions. Our next question is from Rennie. Rennie, hello.
Good evening. Should a professor be sacked for saying only two biological sexes exist?
OK, so this is a story that broke this week. Graduate students at the University of Southern Maine in the USA are calling for education professor Christy Hammer to be replaced. Now, Hammer allegedly said there are only two biological sexes, but the student said her views were transphobic, and all but one walked out of her classes in protest. So, Josh, now, this is America, so obviously things are a bit more extreme. But isn't there a suggestion that that sort of idea is coming over here a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. But there's a few things that there's a phrase. I've got to read this article. First of all, this is from the Bangor Daily News. This is where it was brokered.
This is where it happened.
And the other most read article on this the Bangor Daily News is Bull Moose shot with crossbow.
I mean, that's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, so that's the sort of level that we're dealing with here. But yeah, the person, the student it happened to, then said that they wanted a facilitative, restorative justice meeting. I don't know if we have those here yet.
How does that work? It sounds like a struggle session.
Basically, they just want to complain.
They want to complain,
and
OK.
to have that person to utterly agree with whatever it is that their position is, which is that this person says that someone daring to challenge or I mean, it seems ridiculous to say that biological sex is binary. That person got utterly offended and was like, I'm walking out, and then just walked out.
So, Steve, should it be the case that students have the power to dismiss their tutors, their masters, right?
No, it shouldn't. I mean, I suppose there's a whiff of market forces that if everyone decided to go nowhere near a university, it would go bankrupt.
Right.
But save for that, no, I mean, what gets me about these stories is this huge gap in between agreeing with someone and thinking what they've said is the worst thing that you could possibly say. There's disagreement.
Right.
And you don't have to believe the thing that's being said. You can just be like, oh, no, I think you're wrong about that, but I don't want to end your career.
Isn't that a weird impulse? I don't know where it's come from. I don't get it. I think disagreement's fun, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we totally don't agree about most things.
Right.
That tie, for example. I'm kidding.
I knew he was.
No, of course I've got to go over the tie. But the point is that we can disagree. We ideologically are very different. Yeah. But I don't think, I tell you who should never have a career ever again. Andrew Doyle.
Yeah, it's so weird. And why is it that this is happening to this generation of students?
It's entitlement.
Really?
I believe it's entitlement, and I think it's also an inability to be challenged or to argue through their positions. It's kind of like what we were talking about in your last interview.
Yeah.
Which is that's how you come up with your positions, is by having healthy debate. But
even sometimes with difficult people.
Absolutely.
And,
but the irony, of course, is this class was called Creating a Positive Learning Environment. So that's what it is. And this student is now saying that they want the teacher to either retire or go on diversity training.
I mean, that is massively entitled.
It's unbelievable just because this person is stating a biological fact. But it challenges their way, their perception of the universe and how they perceive themselves.
There's been a few stories like this in America. I know there were a number of students did this to Professor Camille Parlier as well. They were saying that demanding that she be fired. I don't think the university truckled to that. But is this a problem that could migrate over here, or do you think we're just we're resistant to that kind of thing?
I think we're more resistant than America. I'd imagine the idea of seeing someone almost faint because they're offended and anyone around them care is not very British, is it?
But then the case of Kathleen Stock gives an example where, the union didn't stand by her. She wasn't obviously fired at the bidding of the students, but she was put into a position where she felt she had to resign. I mean, that's kind of close, isn't it?
Well, then it becomes a difficult issue of working out who's in charge of preventing situations like that. Because then, my argument is that it's fine to disagree, so it's fine to have lots of people disagreeing with the point of view of someone who still has their job. I shouldn't silence those people, nor should I silence the person with the job.
I agree with that, but I think when they're dressing up in masks and setting off flares and intimidating and harassing people, that veers over into criminality.
We already have a law against harassment, though.
Yeah,
so maybe we don't need to change anything. We just need to work out which parts we enact sooner.
Interesting.
Well, it's just when Kathleen Stock is walking to work and sees posters decrying her name and calling her a bigot, that is wrong. That's intimidation. And this, by the way, this student, they're going to go off. They're trained to be a high school teacher.
Really?
Yeah, and that's what they're going to go off now and teach.
The worst thing they could do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, for goodness sake. Anyway, we've got another question now. This is from Frank. Where's Frank? Hello,
Hello
Frank. What's your question, Frank?
Right, does being compared to Pontius Pilate warrant a compensation payout?
OK, and so it sounds like an odd question, but this is a story that broke this week. 66-year-old insurance worker David Finch has won an age discrimination case after his boss said he had been around, quote, as long as Pontius Pilate. This employment tribunal heard that the remark was made to Finch as he negotiated to leave the firm. Is there a case, Steve? I mean, I get this feeling that a lot of people have a blind spot when it comes to ageism. But should it be the case that you could sue for a comment that sounds a little bit flippant?
No, you should be sue for ageism, definitely. But that is effectively hyperbole. I don't think the person saying it actually meant that they'd been around during the time of Pontius Pilate, and I think we're allowed to exaggerate for effect. Because if that suddenly gets brought in as a rule, then you'll never be able to make a simile ever again without suddenly getting fined.
But Burke, can you make a hyperbolic, jokey comment about an immutable characteristic? You know, if you're going to say age is fine, is race fine, is sexuality fine? You know, where do you draw that line?
But then I think the original point about age discrimination isn't fine. I'm not sure that sentence is it. If you read the whole article, it's not that he's just saying one sentence was enough for me to think this is terrible. It was more about a pattern of behaviour. People were treating him a certain way because of his age and because of his health condition, which meant he was not able to necessarily stay awake all the time, but then that was just blamed on his age, I think. So age discrimination bad, but we don't want to tip into that land of having a sentence that could get you
It's
fine.
a weird comparison to make. Like, people sometimes say, you know, you've been around since the dinosaurs. Why hone in on Pontius Pilate?
Because the person who made the reference is old.
Yes.
Themselves.
Oh, they're quite old.
That's what I'm saying. It's actually one older person talking to another older person.
OK.
It's not like a 20-year-old going, oh, I'm going to impress you with my Christian knowledge.
Because I don't think a lot of young people know who Pontius Pilate is.
No, I doubt it. So it's one person making a joke to a peer of the same age.
Yes.
That's more what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you say, in the actual article, there's a lot more going on, and this person was just like passing out because, you know, they were old.
How old were they, Josh?
25.
Oh. We're going to have to move on to another question now, and this is from an email account. This came in from Tony. Hello, Tony. Tony says, should the PM have stopped King Charles from attending the climate conference? So, as you know, King Charles is known to be a passionate defender of the environment, but he will not be attending the COP27 climate change summit in Egypt next month. The King was reportedly planning to deliver a speech at the summit, but was advised to stay away by Liz Truss. This is interesting because when, obviously, there have been lots of discussions recently about the fact that, unlike Queen Elizabeth, we know King Charles's views on all sorts of things because he's been so vocal about it. And could it be the case that he will be able to stay out of politics? Now, he said that he could, but a lot of people aren't so sure. What do you think, Steve?
Well, because it doesn't matter to me if he does or doesn't.
Right.
I don't care. I'm starting to find this story quite funny because you're right. If anyone's saying, no, he shouldn't say this, we already know what he thinks.
We do know what
So
he
we
thinks,
all stick our fingers in our ears and pretend we don't know already. And look, we're on a show that's about free speech. I'm not going to try and say everyone should be able to say whatever they want, apart from the monarch, if they disagree with my point of view.
But isn't the point that the monarchy are meant to be non-political, right?
Yeah, of course they are, but it's too late now. I think that's the original point we're making, is we know where he stands on this, so why just enforce some silence now?
What do you think, Josh?
Well, I think it's probably a good thing that King Charles is still in the country so he can accept a new PM very quickly.
Yes.
Tory voters don't like that. OK, but it is interesting. The other interesting thing in the article is that it says a source says that the government really shouldn't have done this and they should let us see. And that reads to me, knowing various journalists, that they're being briefed by the palace.
Yes.
So if there's this kind of war happening behind the scenes already between the palace and the government, that's not a good start.
No, it's not good.
To a 2-week relationship.
Do you think there are some sort of...
She's not had a good start, you kidding me?
Yeah.
Do you think there are some cases where certain kinds of public figures probably shouldn't stick their noses in when it comes to politics? I'm thinking as well of the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's made comments about governmental policy. Isn't it just the case that the monarchs, religious leaders, maybe they should keep things to themselves?
No, I don't think so at all, actually. But I think particularly the monarchy should. I think it's right that religious leaders should. It doesn't mean I agree with everything the Archbishop says. Certainly I disagree with a lot. But I think absolutely they have that's part of their role, is to comment on society and how it fits in with the ideology that they're putting forward. But that specifically the monarchy is meant to be quiet because they're not in charge anymore.
Yeah, but what about Steve's point about we already know what he thinks, so it doesn't matter if he says it?
Well, that's because he was, waiting around for so long. Yeah. He couldn't be expected really to keep his mouth shut for 50 years.
Well, why not? I mean, the Queen did. We don't know what she
I know,
thinks
but
about all
she
sorts of
became
things.
queen so early. He spent the whole lifetime just living his life and pontificating on things, not as the king, just as a normal, everyday prince.
Right, our next question is from another email. This is from Justine. Justine says, are new rules making it harder to find things in supermarkets? Now, I read this story and I was utterly baffled by this. So apparently, a new law has been passed. They've been dubbed the obesity rules. And these regulations came in effect on Saturday. And they basically restrict the areas that supermarkets and stores can put items if they've got a high fat, salt or sugar content. I think what it effectively means, Steve, is that you can't put unhealthy foods too near the counter where you might buy them. Is that right?
Yeah, and end of aisle things as well. But the reason this is a theory, I'm not sure this is the best execution of it, but it is true that certain places in supermarkets see more purchases made from there. The height on the shelf, whether you're the end rather than the side of an aisle, and when you're queuing to scan your goods, they are better places. So actually, I'm not against this as a rule.
But people are saying that they can't find the foods they want to find because they've been moved around.
Yeah, but
there's a panic going on, Steve. Take it seriously.
There's a food crisis.
Yeah.
What, because you can't afford it? No, I can't find it. Look, it happens in supermarkets all the time, doesn't it? Every so often, a supermarket will just rejig, and that's it. It's lost. It's like you've had some sort of
But it is
trauma.
annoying. I was in an unfamiliar Waitrose the other day, and I couldn't find anything.
Wow, you've revealed so much there.
What do you think, Josh? Do you think that look, is this a case of coddling? Is this the case that the government is stepping in and
But it's like when they
looking
stopped
after
doing sugar drinks, and
Yeah.
they did it, and now those drinks taste pretty much exactly the same. And I think it's probably that could well be saving people's lives. I think it's a good thing. I think Boris Johnson, this was put through because when he had his weight issues when getting COVID, and this is one of the things that he actually pushed through that I see as actually very positive. And it's a pretty good idea. And first of all, I don't think these laws have actually 100% gone through yet because they were certainly postponed.
Yeah.
And now there's discussion about whether they should. And the supermarket's saying, look, we spent a fortune on this. Just put the laws through now, please. But look, put all that sort of fatty, sugary stuff, put it really far away, so you've got to walk a couple of miles to get to it.
And then
put it high on some shelves, so you've got to climb, and then it all evens out.
But the thing about this is, you remember when Iron Brew, they had to cut their sugar, and then there was contraband Iron Brew. There was like the original stuff on the black market because people wanted the old stuff.
I went to public school. I don't know what Iron Brew is.
OK, that's a fair point.
Talk to the commoner over here.
I'll talk to the pleb. What do you think about that?
But for a short time, and people probably got over it when they tasted official Iron Brew and just grew up a little bit. I still partake of the Iron Brew.
The old Iron Brew is better, though.
Yeah, but that's not the same with this law. Like, you're not going to bother to have some sort of contraband under-the-counter goods just because you couldn't be bothered to find the aisle it's on. All they've done is moved it. You can still buy a fat food. It's just around the corner.
Yeah, but like Josh says, it's harder. And if you're a larger person, it's harder to... Anyway.